With something like Breaking Bad, again, I haven't seen Breaking Bad, but I kind of have an idea of how it ends. It ends with the ending of Walter White's story. Walter White's story ends.
Sure.
And that's how it ends. There's no like, oh, we're kicking off the next generation of drug dealers or whatever. No, you're ending Walter White's story. It is a definitive end to Walter White's story. Yeah, the drug dealer family. Yeah.
We
got
now
Billy.
have
We
an
got
army.
Bobby. They're taking over. Yeah.
We now have an army of meth dealers.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw that somebody has confirmed, it's a few other sources, but this one I've always really trusted, and they've said that Bradley Cooper has been cast as a character in Superman. Have you seen any of this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've not heard about any of this.
They have apparently casted him as Jor-El. That was my reaction. Oh.
I didn't know that Jor-El was really going to be in this Superman movie, to be honest with you. I didn't know if it really, like... okay, I feel like it's just going to be flashbacks, to be totally honest with you. I feel like Jor-El... given what we know about where the plot of this Superman movie is going, it has to only be flashbacks. Like...
Well, the thing I will say is, like, yeah, this is Superman's already been here. They're clearly trying to say that he's been around for a while. You also got to remember, this is pre-LexCorp Lex Luthor. So the timeline is still earlier in the Superman timeline. So I
thought it was the starting of LexCorp, not necessarily pre-LexCorp, but like he is getting there. Because don't we see him in Lex Tower? Don't we see him in Lex Tower?
It's Luthor Corp.
Or Luthor Corp, yeah.
It says it on the thing. That's different. Luthor Corp is the name that the company that his father had when Lex wants to break. At least I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on this, but I've watched Smallville. I know how this works. When he wants to get out of,
I have not watched Smallville.
When he wants to get out from his father's shadow, he changes the company name specifically to Lex Corp instead of Luthor Corp, which was the family name. So, based on that logic and knowledge, I'm willing to guess that this is still earlier in the Superman timeline, but it's also past the point of we know who Superman is. We know, like, he's been around the block. He saves some people, this, that. We might actually be looking more at he has taken on like a General Zod type figure. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. But he hasn't faced like a really big, massive threat like what he's about to face in this movie, which, again, we know nothing about. I don't even know who he's fighting in the Superman movie. The whole point of why I'm saying that is because I don't necessarily think that it's just going to be flashbacks for Jor-El. I do think that there's a small chance, he goes to the Fortress of Solitude and they might pull some Man of Steel crap. And, all of a sudden, here's an illusion of Bradley Cooper, So I hear what you're saying. I don't know. I will be honest, and that's actually a good thing of conversation for us both to have at one point is, what exactly is Superman about? Because that what they've done so well for this marketing is they've given us so much, but also not given us anything about the plot at the same time.
I feel like I should know I feel like we should know what the plot's about at this point. But like you said, obviously we know Lex Luthor is going to play a big part. But is he the big bad? I feel like he is. I feel like the big bad is Lex Luthor. But I don't think it's going to be we get to defeating Lex Luthor. Because I feel like this is only because I don't think we have technically a confirmation of a second Superman movie. But we do have the confirmation of Supergirl, Women of Tomorrow, which I believe takes place in the same exact universe. So maybe it's more of a world building Superman where he has a few villains that he fights, because we do see I don't want to say a few different villains, but we see a few different possible villain of the week style, because you have that one scene of him with Lois and the city's being destroyed by, I believe, an alien. So I don't think that's the big bad, though. I think that's just a one-off thing. I don't think it's a flashback, but I think it's a one-off thing. And then you have obviously Lex Luthor, who biggest villain to Superman. You think of Superman and you think of villains, it's Lex Luthor. It's kind of like with I don't even know. I mean, the only other, this is something that I feel like is a huge difference between Marvel and DC, at least to me. And I feel like this could be a whole topic of its own, so I won't ramble on too long. But Batman has the Joker. Now, granted, Batman also has Two-Face and a bunch of other villains, but Batman has you think of Batman, you think of Joker.
The Joker
you think of Superman, you think of Lex Luthor. You think of Spider-Man, I feel like you think of way, like, so many more villains than just one. Like, when I say Spider-Man, what's the first villain that comes to mind? I can think of Otto Octavius, Green Goblin, Hobgoblin. You have Scorpion. You have, you have so many different villains. You think of Doctor Strange. No one can name a Doctor Strange villain before the movies other than Dormammu. Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Which, weirdly enough, Marvel reposted on their official YouTube channel that 9-minute clip from the movie, yesterday or the day before, which I found really odd. But yeah, anyways, before we ramble on too much, what's up, Nimrods? It's your boys back with another week to talk about all things nerdy with your favorite Nimrods. I'm one of your hosts today, Brandon, aka Parafish, here with
Juggernaut, aka Carson.
This week we're gonna be putting a wrap on our 3 top 5s. So these top 5s. So first week was movies, second week was TV. This week, we both got to pick what we wanted our top 5 to be. Now, Carson, you're not going to be at all shocked by what my top 5 is. I'm going to be honest, I wasn't able to be that creative. I already told you what it was, technically, even though I didn't tell you what it was. I am curious to hear what yours is, though, because I gave you some suggestions, and I don't know if you took them or not. So
today we will be today we'll be ranking my top 5 favorite national parks. With visual aids.
I will say I did consider doing my top 5 favorite foods just to throw you off, but I wanted to keep it relatively nerdy. If you're wondering, though, my number 1 favorite food as of now granted it can change. My number 1 favorite food right now, pho. If you haven't had pho, go eat pho. It is phenomenal. In fact, I want pho right now. But yeah, it is our wrap up of our 3 top 5s. Next week we'll have a completely different topic. Do you want to go ahead and hint what the topic is for next week? Because we talked about this right before we started to hit record.
Yeah. So next week we are well, in 2 weeks we are going to be very blessed with a brand new season hitting of a very particular show. That show.
Well, technically, in 2 weeks is not when we'll start talking about it.
Yes, but we're blessed with the presence of a particular show coming back again.
Yes.
Specifically, that show being Andor. And so next week we are hoping, and it's I will get it all done this week. I will finish watching it.
Because Carson, you have not watched any Andor, or just haven't finished Andor.
I actually, like, a few years ago, I started Andor, and I actually I remember because my dad was on the couch with me. I got 30 minutes in, I loved it, and then my grandparents came in for like a month-long trip, and I never went back to it.
I was gonna say, if you say that you did not like Andor, we're gonna have some problems, because it is universally accepted as one of, if not the best, of the live-action Star Wars TV series.
Well, more than
obviously, I think Clone Wars holds number 1 for TV in general, but I think Andor is universally accepted as one of the best.
I don't know, because ultimately, at the end of the day, when you look at again, award seasons and whatnot, it's unfair.
We don't care about those. Yeah,
but Andor, I don't recall if it won, but it was nominated in almost every category. As a Star Wars show.
It's a great show. Phenomenally acted. It's phenomenally acted, phenomenally shot. The story is great. Even though you know where Andor as a character ends up, because obviously this is a prequel TV show. And then I'll go ahead and hint, we already have the next few weeks of content planned. The week after, I have not seen The Last of Us Season 1, so in preparation of The Last of Us Season 2, I will be watching all of The Last of Us Season 1. We'll sit down and talk about it together, And then after that, we're going to start dual episodes. So half of the topic of the episode will be Andor Season 2. Half the episode will be Last of Us Season 2. We'll see how that goes. Might need to make some adjusting after the first episode, but that's the current plan. But Carson, that's enough about what we're going to watch. I want to hear about what you have watched this week.
Absolutely. How did I know you were going to ask me that question?
I have no idea. It's not like we do this every single week.
It's not like we do this every week or when we're on any given phone call. This is obviously not the question we ask each other. No, so this week we had we had 2 episodes of Daredevil Born Again. I did not even realize that. And so I woke up.
I didn't realize that either until I feel like a lot of people started talking. Well, it was actually when I was putting together the release calendar that we have to show all the releases that we're excited for. Yeah. And I was like, wait, every other week it's 1, 1, 1, 2. And I was like, huh?
Well, I mean,
do you know why that is?
I don't. I'm guessing because it's like technically this is the mid-season. So they just wanted to boost it along further. I can put together why they probably did, but they never gave like an official reason. I can put together why though. And I'll start off by saying this again. Very similar last week. I love this show. I think they're doing a great job with it. From the changes that they did make with the show, with it being its own thing originally, and adding the stuff from the previous series. I think it's still really good. That being said, episode 5 and episode 6 drastically different. Drastically different
from each other or from the show as a whole.
From each other. Okay. Just tonally. Episode 5 is a self-contained story. Matt Murdock goes to the bank to apply for a loan for the law firm, and then the bank is getting robbed. Who is also there? Yusuf Khan, Kamala's father, who is in the entire episode. And there's a lot more comedy, even the lighting for the episode, even though at the end of the episode, Matt beats the holy fucking shit out of another guy.
I mean, that's Daredevil. That's
yeah, but there's still like a lighter tone to that episode, and you can feel it throughout the entire episode. It's not bad by any means. I'm okay with Daredevil having a slightly lighter tone. I'm not like absurdly upset about that, especially because when you cut to episode 6, and this is where my qualm is, it goes right back to dark, and it's about a serial killer who's about to kill a child.
So it's like a huge tonal shift. Like,
it's like a massive tonal shift.
My thought process for when I first saw it, because I know nothing about where the story is or anything other than what you tell me every week, but my thought was, maybe these 2 episodes like are a continuous story. And they were just like, it's the mid-season. Let's just release both episodes at once. From the sound of it, it is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. Also, last week you asked a very good question of, is this story being very faithful and truthful to the adaptation of Born Again? Well, I actually finally started reading Born Again, and I'm about 75% of the way through.
Wow. That's fast. I mean, I know it's not like a super long story, but geez.
Well, I got to do something when I'm at work and I'm sitting around for 2 hours not doing anything. So
fair enough.
And to answer your question in the most simple way possible, no. It's just the name.
I mean, based on just what you've been telling me, it doesn't even sound remotely close to the comics.
I mean, like they're Born Again. I mean,
other than the fact that they both have Daredevil in it.
Yeah, I mean, well, and the only thing that I've seen that has come close to it is season 3. Like I mentioned last week, season 3 borrows from one part of the story, which is that Kingpin makes Melvin make another suit because he's trying to frame Matt Murdock, frame Daredevil. Kingpin knows who he is, and instead he sends this insane assassin in Bullseye to go kill people dressed as Daredevil. I mean, that is literally ripped from that comic, but that's the only thing that I've ever seen that's from the Born Again comic. Now, for all I know, season 2 of this show could easily borrow more from the comic, and especially
because I know it has already been confirmed for a season 2, and I wonder if maybe this is a setup in a way, and like season 1 will end as a way to officially kick off Born Again. Now, I will say, I would not be a fan of that. Like, even if the episodes are great, I still wish that they would have called it something different. If you're going to call it Daredevil Born Again, literally okay, I guess the only counter argument is, they're using this as Daredevil is being born again in Disney and no longer in Netflix world, which I feel like that is a lot more the reason. If the story's not the same, that might be a lot more the reason why they're calling it Born Again. I don't like that though, because Daredevil Born Again, like I said last week, is the most recognizable Daredevil storyline. Like, you say Daredevil and you ask someone to think of a storyline, it's Born Again. Like, there's other great Daredevil storylines, but Born Again is the Daredevil storyline. And taking that name and like, I guess mixing it up and adding, from what sounds like just a villain of the week episodic style, I don't know. Like, again, I'm not saying the episodes are bad. I'm just saying for advertising Daredevil Born Again and then not having the Born Again story is an interesting move.
Well, and again, I'm giving this a bit more grace, like I said last week, because again, they did do a complete overhaul of the show. Like, where season 2 was going was not where season 2 was going. It was supposed to be in a completely different direction. So until season 2 comes and fails, I'm not going to sit here and go, this was absolutely horrible. Again, they shot all of this stuff in 2023, maybe very early 2024. This was shot a long time ago. And then they wanted to bring in Karen. They wanted to bring in Foggy. John Bernthal said he wasn't going to return as Punisher because of whatever script they had in that moment. So they finally got him back when they changed the script, and they gave him some creative liberties to help bring him back. So until I see, like, okay, this is where, this is the path that they wanted to end up putting themselves on. Until I see that path start to fail, I'm not going to get upset at it yet. Again, I am still having fun with it. I loved the bank episode. I thought it was great. I actually, funny enough, I heard, was it Greg Alba? It might have been Greg Alba, but I heard him explain it like this. It feels like one of the Marvel special presentations could have been that self-contained Daredevil story with Yusuf Khan, and it actually would have done great. And I'm like, that's not a bad idea.
We are getting, not that it's necessarily directly related, but we are confirmed to be getting a John Bernthal, I think, written and directed Punisher Marvel special.
Written for sure. I don't know about directed, but written for sure.
I don't know about directed, but I'm almost positive it's written. Because even though John Bernthal said he wasn't going to come back for Daredevil Born Again, he has said so many times in interviews that he loves the character of Punisher. It's like his favorite character. He feels such a connection to the character of Punisher. And that's why he's like, I want to be able to write my own Punisher story. Now, I'm assuming it'll still have influence from the comic books. But it'll still be John Bernthal's Punisher. Because, I mean, I still remember there was a story, I don't know if you ever saw this, but he mentioned in interviews when John Bernthal, when it was originally announced that he was getting the role of Punisher, first thing he did was he ran out to a comic book store and started buying up comic books. And then the comic book dealer saw the stack of comic books, looked at him, and went, you're not getting this, you're not getting this, you're not getting this. No, you'll read this. Yeah, exactly. And it was like, and he looked at him, and he was like, don't fuck this up. Because Punisher is a beloved character. And it is so funny to see John Bernthal. And the reason I bring this up is because it's funny to see John Bernthal going from someone who I'm super glad he read the comic books, but clearly someone who wasn't super familiar with Punisher to now someone who's so invested in his own character that he wants to write and is willing to step away from the character if he doesn't feel the script that's being written is going to portray the character as well as he wants it to be, which is what it sounds like was the problem with the original Daredevil script.
Well, and I also will say, we'll get back to Daredevil in a second, because I do like talking about John Bernthal, this character. I love him as this character, man. He's so good. I do think that he was one of those people who he took on this role with such ease, not because he read the comics, not because he knew who the character was, but because they gave him the description of the character, and I think in some way it kind of fits him. Not the family dying part, not at all. His family was not killed at
I would hope not. I would hope not.
At a carousel. But you know, he served. He is a veteran, and he served. So he understands, you know, that side of it. He went through it. And so there is something very natural about, especially for an actor, it's not method acting, but in a sense, I guess you could call it. There is the idea that he can become very invested in the character because he feels very close to the character, and he understands what the character is going through because he went through a very similar thing. And
well, yeah, it's being able to put, again, not method acting, but being able to resonate with a character that you're playing. I genuinely believe, as someone who's not an actor, but someone who's seen you doing acting and also watching so many movies and TV shows, it is very important for you to be able to like resonate with that character, because if you can't, then you're just acting. And the problem with just acting is you could be a phenomenal actor, but if you don't like the character and you're literally just acting, I guess, for a paycheck is the best way to put it, but really just to act, then for me, that shows through. Like, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I know I've watched movies and TV shows where you're like watching something and you're like, this person doesn't care about this character whatsoever. It's just them acting. And I don't want to watch someone just act. I want to watch someone be that character.
You want them to take on the persona.
Yes, but exactly. I want you to embody the character, because that's just more enjoyable, and that is what I feel like acting is in its purest form, is being another character or being another person or whatever it might be.
Well, and especially when you pull from something specifically like, you know, a book or a comic book, or you're pulling from any exterior source that's not like original or created. Even Star Wars, to some example, because they have the books and the comics, and they've done that game for a little bit now too. But you if you were a fan of that book, you want to see that book done justice. You want to see this role done correctly. There was a movie that came out in 2023. I was really excited for it, not only because it was Martin Scorsese, but because about 2 years prior to that movie coming out, I had read a book called Killers of the Flower Moon, which was about these murders taking place in this Native American Osage area in I think it was 1937, 1930s, 1940s, around that time. But specifically what this book is about is the birth of the FBI. We follow a man who is like one of the first FBI agents. It literally is like the first one of the first things the FBI ever did. It is literally the birth of the FBI solving a case, which is one of the biggest cases because it's a bunch of murders happening. And when I read that book and they started giving casting announcements, all I wanted was, okay, I cannot see you as DiCaprio was cast as one of the killers. And I literally went, okay, I cannot see you play Jordan Belfort from The Wolf of Wall Street. I cannot see you playing Jack Dawson. I need to see the character of Ernest Burkhart. That's what I need to see. De Niro is another one. I cannot see you playing all these mafia film characters that you played. I need to see the character that they cast you in as King. I need to see those characters. And so I understand where people are coming from specifically. It's really specifically with John Bernthal as Punisher, when it's like, okay, you don't fuck this up. You don't screw this up. This is very important. You are an integral part of what makes, like, do not screw this up.
Well, and it's a character that resonates a lot with people who have either lost their family or military, or like, that's one of the reasons it's such an important character. Is it's not just a character. Again, that's why, and that's kind of going back to like why I feel like you need to be able to resonate with the character. Like, an actor needs to be able to resonate with the character and live that character, is because the reason these characters are so popular and so meaningful to so many people is less because, oh, cool action, whatever. Like, yes, that's important, but the characters that you remember are the characters that you can feel yourself as a viewer, and you can resonate with them. Not necessarily through the performance, but through the character's story. Everyone can find a piece of themselves in a story, whether it like let's bring up an example of Pirates of the Caribbean. Like, I just because we talked about it last week, I'm not a pirate, you're not a pirate. Like, no one can resonate with being a pirate, but you can resonate with that feeling of like loneliness and going solo and finding like yourself as a captain and a leader. You can resonate with that. You don't have to resonate with being a pirate, but you can resonate with the character traits. And that's why I feel like if that's the reason why we enjoy watching the characters, I personally want to see that out of the actors in them portraying the characters.
Sure. Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. But coming back full circle,
coming back to the original topic,
coming back to Daredevil, the tone between these two episodes, between episode 5 and episode 6, are just very different. And it's not bad, but I will say it's more to its detriment, because for one moment you go to, oh, that was really fun. And, Daredevil is kicking butt, breaking legs, smashing faces into glass. It's really cool. And to the next you go, holy crap, Daredevil just said the F word. And, there's a serial killer about to kill White Tiger's daughter. I'm like, oh my God. What is happening? How do we get to this? But I understand why they did what they did in releasing 2 episodes. They could have just released it week by week. I don't think anybody would have cared about that either. I do believe that they did this specifically because they knew episode 5 was its standalone story, and they had to get to that born again moment where Matt Murdock and Kingpin, to a degree, both take on the personas that they once tried to leave behind and fully come back after they realized, okay, I've been gone all this time, and now this is happening in my city. We have, for Kingpin, we have vigilantes running around, and I want to stop that. For Daredevil, it's Muse is killing innocent people, and he's in the 60s. And I've done nothing about this because I've been so scared of my other half. And we get what is probably maybe the best fight scene so far in this show in episode 6. Okay. I think it's this really fun combination of, it cuts from Matt. He'll throw a right hook punch, and then the punch finishes with Kingpin smacking and decking this other dude with his right hand, and the camera's at the same angle. Like it flows so well, and it cuts back and forth as you're watching them literally be born again, as you're watching them both come back. It's not just like, it was so creatively shot and so well done that it was really cool, and I loved it. I loved every second of it. And now we're at a point, now that they are born again, where do we go? What are we doing? Where's the focus of this? And I think they finally found it. Matt wants to take out Muse. Kingpin wants to get rid of all vigilantes, while at the same time getting back on top of the old life that he once had. And
being a Kingpin.
Which I guess you could say, like, even though the characters themselves didn't know that, we as the audience members know that. So it's kind of like, okay, now we have this. Now can we move forward, please?
We finally got to the point in which we've been waiting for.
I'm patient. And I'm not gonna say I'm like that. I also will still say this. Even with all its like tonal differences and clearly seeing the marked difference between what the original idea for the show was and what the new version of the show is, I still think that this season so far is better than season 2 of Daredevil, of the original show. So I mean, as long as they finish strong, I'm perfectly fine with how this is gone. I'm enjoying my time. I think it's great. But now I actually want to talk about the main thing that I consumed. Last week, I talked about my favorite show of all time. And I had also mentioned I was almost done rewatching it. Well, Brandon, I have finished rewatching The Sapranos. And it is...
Okay.
It is the best show of all time. From a creative standpoint, from a directing standpoint, from a writing standpoint, it all works so well. And I know I mentioned this last week, but it literally defined television forever. Like, no show could ever live up to it because of what it did, which is, okay, let's take what could be mini movies and let's put it into a television show. By the way, this is going to be one of the most expensive things for its time, one of the most expensive things to do. Okay, sure.
How many episodes is Sopranos? And I'm assuming they're standard TV length episodes, right? They're that like 45 minutes because it's an hour without commercials.
Yeah,
like
some of them.
How many episodes?
Some of them are an hour. I think only one of them is like an hour and a half, and that's like a big chunky episode. But that's like a big chunky episode. It's actually my favorite episode. I'm pretty sure there's, if I'm doing math correctly, I think there's like 79.
Oh wow, that's a lot more than I was expecting.
Maybe a little more. Well, it's technically, if you look at it objectively, it is 7 seasons. each with at least, other than the last one, which is only 6 episodes, the other ones are 13 episodes each season. So
okay.
That's also like a rough estimate. I don't actually know. I'm just taking a guess. But I've slowly been chipping at this show over the past 5 months because I've had people come in and out of my house. I can't always watch it all the time.
Yeah.
It's not exactly the most kid-friendly show to watch, so you can't exactly have it on all the time.
Yeah.
But no, man. Look, this show has always been important to me because of how important it was to my father. And getting to watch the show almost like a rite of passage thing was always very important to me. So screw what everybody else says. I might be a little biased. Maybe that's why it's my favorite show of all time. I don't know. But I do believe that as far as like a writing standpoint, I don't think you can get anything else like it. I think that The Sopranos knew exactly what it wanted to do, exactly what story it wanted to tell. It set out and it did that flawlessly. I think David Chase, who created the show, pulled a lot, and he's even said this, like he pulled a lot out of his own life for the character of Tony Soprano. So, Brandon, because I know you don't fully know this, it's not just a mafia story. The whole show kicks off with Tony Soprano in therapy. The whole point is that he's you're watching this psychological balance of this man just completely crumble. That's the whole point of the show. And again, he's in the mafia. He goes to therapy. And the the whole thing you're watching through this show is watching this man refuse to change, even though people are telling him, "Hey, this is what is right. This is what you should do," and he just doesn't. Cheat on his wife. Yeah, I'm going to continue to do that. Kill a guy. Yeah, I'm going to continue to do that. All because he's a greedy, narcissistic personality that only wants what he wants. And that, like, you as much as you do see like slight changes in him, it just always reverts back to what it always was. And one of my favorite examples is at one point Tony gets shot in the show and he doesn't die. He eventually wakes up. And prior to that, he had like this whole revelation of, I'm not going to cheat anymore. I'm not going to do all these horrible things. I'm just going to run the business and I'm going to make sure I provide for my family. And then like 5 episodes later, maybe 4 episodes later, you realize, oh crap, he broke his promise immediately because he drops the liner of, hey, so I almost had like a near-death experience recently. And yeah, I just, life is short, man. I'm going to do what I want to do while I'm here. And I'm like, gosh darn it.
Life is short. Life is short. Cheat on your wife. Kill that person. Sell those drugs. Please don't do that. That is not advice. In fact, don't do that. That is the exact opposite of what you should do. Life is short and you should cherish it.
Well, and clearly Tony is very much cherishing it.
Sure, if that's what you want to call it.
But no, that's the whole draw of this show, is watching this man constantly refuse to change, even though all these opportunities have been presented in front of him. James Gandolfini as Tony Soprano is the defining performance in television ever. I love Game of Thrones to death. I love those performances. Succession, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. I've named all those shows literally last week. I love those shows. Yeah. None of the actors in any of those shows can ever live up to what James Gandolfini did. He packed so much emotion and really became this character. Even if he hadn't died in 2013, if he went and did something after, he would still be known as this role. Like, he never would have done anything as big as this, and I can promise you that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like, I mean, honestly, so many different characters. I was going to name an example, but I'm thinking back. There's so many different characters where, unfortunately, the actors are like, I mean, I guess an example would be like Tom Hiddleston with Loki. Like, Tom Hiddleston has done a lot of other things, but in the general guise of people, he's always going to be viewed as Loki. Same with, honestly, a lot of different characters in the Marvel Universe, but also outside of the Marvel Universe. I mean, you have Walter White, you have, like, it's those iconic performances where you're never going to be unseen from that.
And this show also does something really good with, you look at Tony, and he is not a good person. He is a bad guy.
Yeah.
it really likes to twist your view of it because they show you worse people than Tony. And you start to look at him as the hero. And then at the end of the season, he'll do something that you go, oh, no, wait, he's a bad guy. We can't root for him. Oh, crap. I forgot about this. There's one character named Ralph Cifaretto, who is the biggest piece of garbage, waste of space, filth human being I think you'll ever see in a television show. He literally, like, I don't even know, like, how to, like, without spoiling the show, really, how to, like, give a good example for his character. He doesn't care about anybody. He doesn't look, he only looks out for himself. That's it. That's all he cares about. And Tony does, in some sense, at least care for his family. He wants to provide for his family first. He does care about his family. He does. Ralph doesn't. And his character is a very big contrast to Tony because Tony could very well end up being Ralph if he just snapped his fingers and he like turned life to be in this certain way. He could very well end up being like Ralph. And that's the parallel. The other parallel with Ralph's character, and this is why the show is so good. This whole time you watch Tony refuse to change as a man. You see him give all these opportunities that are presented for him, and you watch him just refuse all of it and refuse to change as a human being. There's an episode with Ralph specifically. Oh my God. And this is why I love this show, because of the comparisons. Ralph's character has a moment, without saying what it is, something really horrible happens to his character, and he changes as a human being. He still does his mafia activities. He's still in the mob. So from that perspective, he's not a good person. But from, killing people or using violence needlessly just because, somebody spat in his shoes or whatnot because he deserved it. Like he wisens up, and he like actually starts looking back at his life, and he feels remorse for the things that he's done, and he feels bad about it, and he does want to try and make a change. Which I think is something that's so clever, because he is the worst human being in the show, and even he is willing to accept change. Tony, on the other hand, who isn't the worst person in the show, but just refuses to change. It's
I mean, I guess to some people that would make him the worst person in the show is not his actions, but it's his lack of change.
Well, and that's what I find so interesting, and this is why I think it's so creative, is because they tell stories like that, and they use a lot of parallels. One of my favorite things about this show is the way they use dream sequences. They usually have, like, so you know how like Game of Thrones does like a battle sequence like every penultimate episode of every season.
Yeah.
Sapranos does a dream sequence pretty much at every episode before the finale. Penultimate. I literally just said it. I can't say it for whatever reason. They do a dream episode, and the dream usually is a way. It's so weird. It's so wackadoo. But you watch this and go, no, that very well could be my dream. Like, that's actually how my dream is told. Like, when you're dreaming and you're driving a car, you don't ever actually visualize where you're going. You don't actually know where you're going. You just show up there randomly in a dream. And that's exactly what the show does. They never show you in your dream. You never actually walk into your own house. You end up in your house, but this time you might be on a horse or something, because that's just how your dream works. And they do it so well. While at the same time in your dream, because obviously consciously when you're dreaming about something that you're thinking about, like, outside. And so all these things that Tony's worrying about, like, there's one episode where Tony's worrying about whether one of his closest friends or guys has flipped on him or turned on him and is now cooperating with the FBI.
Yeah.
And the whole episode is him basically coming to terms with, I've known this for a while, I just didn't want to know it. And you have a literal line where Tony is looking at this fish, and the fish is speaking to him, but it's the voice of his friend. And the fish goes, "Hey man, you know I've been working with the government, right?" And it's like, I don't know, man. I think that's creative writing, and I don't think I've ever seen anything else like it in television, where they use something like a dream specifically to convey the characters' motivations, or how they're feeling, or where the story is actually going to end up. I just think it's really, really cool, and I friggin' love it.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
One thing that's super popular, or I shouldn't say popular, it's the wrong word for it, super common with just TV in general, is shows not sticking the landing. I know that, like, endings is a very hard thing to do, especially for beloved shows, because people have such lofty expectations. I mean, let's use One Piece for an example. One Piece hasn't ended yet, but it's been going on for 20 some odd years. When One Piece finally ends, it could be the best ending in the world. People are still going to hate on it because they've had 20 years to build up. I mean, it's similar to Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has some amazing seasons and then drops the ball. Whether that be for one reason or another is irrelevant. Endings are such a difficult thing to do. I mean, I'll bring up another example, Attack on Titan. I love the ending of Attack on Titan. I feel like it is a perfect ending. Well, perfect might be strong. I feel like it is a phenomenal ending. I feel like people misunderstand the ending. I feel like my favorite part about that ending is when the credits are rolling and you're watching the world crumble again. It is phenomenal because it portrays the entire point of the show in such a beautiful, like, end credit, like, 2-minute sequence, but people hate on it a lot. I feel like endings are such a difficult thing to do in shows.
Yeah.
Does The Sopranos, without spoiling it, because I do want to watch The Sopranos one day, because I have a feeling you're gonna ask me to watch The Sopranos. Does it stick the landing? Does it end well, in your opinion?
I believe it does, and I actually believe, maybe other than Breaking Bad, it is the best ending to any show ever, and it is also the most perfect ending to the show that they had created. It is the most perfect. I literally just talked about how. Now, first off, actually, let me back it up. Let me say this first. Not everybody agrees with that.
Okay.
It is.
I mean, again, not surprising. I love the ending of Attack on Titan. People hate the ending of Attack on Titan. Like, it's yeah.
It's not the episode. It is literally the ending. When I mean the ending, it is the final shot, the final scene of the show is the most controversial thing to ever come out of that show.
I feel like I've heard that before, and I don't know what it is, and I want to keep it that way. But I feel like I have heard that before.
I won't tell you, but I will say this. I talked a lot earlier in this review about The Sapranos, specifically with its connections and how it is there's callbacks and how creative they try to weave in the callbacks. There's a line earlier in season 6. Or season 7, season 6. I think it's season 6. In which Tony's sitting in a boat with another character, Bobby, and Bobby talks about I can't say it specifically, but he makes a line, and he basically says, "I bet you don't even hear it when it happens. I bet in your mind it just happens," and that is a direct callback to the final shot, the final finale. And at first, when I saw this finale, I went, "Dad, did something happen to the episode?" My mom, physically, who has watched the show with my dad the first time, sat down on the couch the moment she knew it was the final scene. She didn't watch it with me and my dad. She knew what scene this was, and then they both looked at me during the final, and I went, "What the frick, guys? What just happened?" So yeah, I love the ending to it. I think it is perfect for the show they created, especially because, again, the show itself is filled with so many callbacks and creative ways to tell the story. I think that it was perfect for the type of show and the type of story they were telling. Some people are more upset about it because this isn't necessarily a spoiler. This is just the type of ending that it is. It is technically an open-ended ending in a sense.
Yeah.
Which I think people, especially nowadays, they don't necessarily like. They like to have the finality of it. They like to have the ending. Again, that's why I love Breaking Bad's ending. It is a very closed-ended ending. You know exactly where the characters end up. You know, it's a connected story from start to finish. Sopranos is too. But when you have an ending that leaves some things up to interpretation, it's really hard for the audience to sit there and go, well, that can't be the finale. I don't want those to be left open. I want to be told exactly what this is. And this is why I love it. You leave people thinking. You start the show with people thinking, and you leave the people with thinking. So that way, even years after, which this is still a topic of conversation, people ask David Chase in interviews, what was that ending about, man? What does it actually mean? And he'll go, I don't know. Talk to me later about it.
Well, and that's where I feel like endings are. So I feel like endings should be judged based off the show that they are a part of. Like, obviously, they kind of are, but like, not as much as I feel like people judge endings as endings, and they should be judged as a part of the show as a whole. Which might make no sense, but let's use an example of Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan wraps up some stories and leaves some other stories, like, I shouldn't say up for interpretation, but it shows that the world continues on. Some stories they just end, and that's just the end. With Attack on Titan, it shows that the world is moving on. You actually see that in, again, like I said, the end credit sequence. But then let's and there are some questions that get left unanswered. Not major ones, but there are some things where you're like, interesting. I still need to think about this, about like the point of this shit, like whatever. Let's go back to One Piece as an example. When One Piece finally ends, whether I still be alive or not, I'm not dying anytime soon. Don't get me wrong. But that's just the joke of it being so long. Anyway, with One Piece, I would actually kind of be a little bit upset, to be honest, if some of the storylines weren't wrapped up. Again, we talked, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, how each character has their... Everyone wants to make Luffy king of the pirates, but everyone... Sanji wants to find the East Blue. Nami wants to map the entire world. Usopp wants to be a brave warrior of the sea. Those things, every character has their own individual goals. And I want to see all of them achieve those goals. I don't want that to be in an epilogue. I don't want that to be, we hope that. I want to actually see that. I want them to wrap up those stories.
Right.
And if they don't, I'll be honest, I will be a little bit upset. But with something like Attack on Titan, having more of an open-ended, the world will continue on. Now, obviously, the One Piece world will continue on. And I have some hopes and obviously thoughts about how One Piece world will end. But I feel like it's a very, like, Attack on Titan's ending made sense for what it is, and if One Piece is not going to... I hope One Piece doesn't follow the same exact style of ending, because it wouldn't fit for the type of show that it is.
Yeah.
All that to say, like, the Sapranos ending, even though I haven't seen it, like, from what it sounds like, if it ends the show that they made, it doesn't matter if it's a good ending. It ended the show that they made in a way that makes sense for the show, and I feel like that's all that should matter.
Like, let's use another example, because you know this example very well, and that's the ending of the Flash TV series.
I actually haven't seen the ending of the Flash TV series. I dropped off about 6 seasons in.
That's fair. I'm okay with that, actually. The show itself,
I don't remember,
fine after a certain point.
I think I dropped off the season. I watched the season with Nora. At least the first season that she was in, and then I think I think I watched either 5 or 6 seasons. Yeah, something
season
like
5,
that.
I'm pretty sure is when that is. Don't quote me on that. I dropped off after season 4, and then I quickly watched through it all to get to the finale, because I'm like, all right, well, I did like this show growing
Have
up.
to see how this ends.
I got to see how it ends. And as much as I hate the open-ended ending for that show because of how episodic it was and how it really should have a clear start and finish story, the whole show with Barry Allen and the Flash is about hope. That has always been what it's been about, at its core.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how the show ends, is Barry giving his powers to these other people to carry on the hope, to carry on this journey that he was on, and it ends with hope. As much as I hate the open-ended ending, that's the exact type of show they set up, was to tell a story about hope. That's always what it was. And so I can't be too mad at it. And Sopranos is no different. It's exactly the type of show that it set up, was to be this contorting, twisty, psychologically messy story. So when it ends with all of those things, I'm like, that doesn't surprise me. Never mind. I'm okay with this. That's fine.
not to harp on the topic too much longer, because I know we'll need to move on, but I guess another example would be like Rogue One. Rogue One has now. I feel like Rogue One has a perfect ending for that movie. But it does two things, and I feel like this is again the best ending that you can have for this show. It ends a story and starts a story. It plays both sides. You end the characters' stories that you're following throughout all of Rogue One, but you start the stories of the next characters. I mean, that's why one of the final shots, if not the final shot, is Princess Leia with R2-D2. That is the start of the next story after we just saw the ending of another story. And it kicks it off so masterfully, even though, again, you kind of have an idea of how Rogue One's going to end going in, but you don't exactly know every single detail. So getting all those details on the ending of the story and then the start of a new one, I think is so masterfully done.
Yeah.
But again, it only works for the story that Rogue One is trying to tell.
Right.
Now, if every story did that, I mean, I guess it's similar in a way to the Flash ending, because again, I haven't seen it, but you're saying it ends Grant Gustin as the Flash's story, or Barry Allen, and it starts this next Flash Brigade family, whatever. But we don't see that story, and we probably, hopefully, never will. But it is kicking off that next generation and kicking off that next story, the ending of one and the beginning of another. With something like Breaking Bad, again, I haven't seen Breaking Bad, but I kind of have an idea of how it ends. It ends with the ending of Walter White's story. Walter White's story ends. And that's how it ends. There's no like, oh, we're kicking off the next generation of drug dealers or whatever. No, you're ending Walter White's story. It is a definitive end to Walter White's story. Yeah, the drug dealer family. Yeah.
We
got
now
Billy.
have
We
an
got
army.
Bobby. They're taking over. Yeah.
We now have an army of meth dealers.
Yeah, exactly. But you're ending that character story because that's what that's for. But we've talked a lot about storytelling. Is there anything else that you want to talk about this week?
I mean, no, but look, I love that show to death, man. I think it's great. I'm gonna make you watch it at some point. It's perfect.
I know.
Perfect. Down to the last minute detail. Anyway, Brandon, what have you been watching this week, brother?
Two things. Well, watching one, reading another. Neither of these are new. There's stuff I've talked about before. But one of them I did finish. And that's where I'll start. I'll start with one I finished. And I finished That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. I sat down and I watched like a season and a half in the past week. Now, granted, That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime is not over. It has finished at season 3, but back in September of last year, they did announce the confirmation of season 4. Because there's a lot of plot that's still left to tell. But dude, I love this show. I feel like I should feel shame in saying that, but I don't, because I genuinely just enjoy this show. It is so I was thinking about this last night when I was trying to go to bed. If Game of Thrones is a T-bone steak with butter and a plate of vegetables and a baked potato and like a Michelin star rest perfectly crafted, That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime is Chick-fil-A. It's really, really good. But it is just junk food. That is what it is. It is like, it's still something that's really, really good, but it's you understand that it's not the peak echelon of, like, you're not eating A5 Wagyu steak. You're eating Chick-fil-A, but you still love that Chick-fil-A. And I know that's a really weird analogy to make, but it really is, because this story is just so, like, I don't want to say even masterfully crafted, because one of the reasons why I equate it to something like fast food is because ultimately there is struggle in the story, but everything just kind of ends up working out in the end. It's not like, it's not something that's super complex and you're thinking about all of it, and like there's so many different things going. Like, there is an element to that, and I'm curious to see where they go, because that plot thread that they've left is getting into like it has been the plotline that is followed for the past like 2 seasons, I'd say, and is gonna, I'm assuming, be the main crux of season 4. Now, I don't know if that's true with the manga, but my assumption with how they end season 3 very deliberately, like setting up this being the plot line, which I'll just go ahead and spoil it for you, because spoiling that Karma got reincarnated as a slime, I don't think takes away from the enjoyment of it whatsoever. It is a show I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in if you ever do get around to watching it one day. But even if you do, it'll probably be so long from now that you'll forget what I'm about to say. But essentially, so that time I got reincarnated as a slime, as I've said, is the story of a human being who died and got reincarnated as a slime in a fantasy world. It's about him. But it's about him wanting to build an empire between monsters and humans. A huge thing is he wants synergy, and it's obviously an allegory for racism. Like they do not hide that whatsoever.
Sure.
But essentially where this season ends is setting up essentially a cabal of like these elders who don't want this to happen. Like it's very plain and simple. Like you're not going to be brain explode with the complexities of the show, but it is this group of old people who don't want this to happen. They don't want monsters and humans to sync, but it's being led by, and this is where I'm really curious to see where this goes. These old men are kind of being manipulated and used by this little girl who, it's kind of hinted at, never explicitly said, but she also was reincarnated into this world, is kind of my assumption. It's heavily hinted at. And her whole thing is she's greedy. It's not that she necessarily hates the fact that monsters and humans get along. She ultimately doesn't really care. It's more like she just wants everything. She wants greed. Like this new, like the Jura Tempest forest, which is the land that Rimuru rules over, the main character, and lives in. These elder cabal people, and specifically this little girl, don't want Rimuru to take over this area. They want that for themselves. It's a little less about them being like anti. We have those storylines though. One of the storylines is there's this church. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But it's essentially the Holy Church. I think it's literally actually called the Holy Church. And they view monsters as an affront to God. They view it as like our God hates monsters, and therefore we hate monsters. And you would think that it would end with a whole anti-religious message and things like that. It's actually done really interestingly in a way that I actually really enjoy, because it doesn't skew an anti-religious viewpoint, in my opinion. It actually is one of the problems that I have with just religion in general is people who take the readings and the texts and the teachings and spin it for their own gain. And in the story that this tells is these they're called the 7 days clergy. They're these 7 really old men. They're completely faceless. You never get to know who they are because it doesn't matter, because they're actually just a manifestation of people who are taking religion and using it for their own personal gains and to further their own agenda. It's never a religion's bad. It's a this is what can happen if you take what is taught in a religion and spin it for yourself and become greedy and try to get personal gain out of it. Which again, it's a level of complexity that I didn't really expect from this show to delve into. Again, I knew like the racism part, but you're also tackling like people spiraling with religion and what a god actually is. And it's again, it's so many different plot lines. One of the big things from this, like that plot line, the 7 days clergy, was the kind of magnum opus of season 2. It was building up these, this is where everything kind of works out, and it fits a little bit more into that junk food category, because everything works out really easily. Rimuru is just made out to be like essentially a genius. Like he's able to figure things out really quickly. There's not really much of a struggle, but it is interesting to see how they balance them not necessarily struggling with still telling these complex stories, because at the end of the day, they figure out really easily that it's the 7 Days clergy that are manipulating them, and they defeat them really easily. The whole point isn't necessarily building up this whole big, like, there's obviously a big fight, but you want to know how the 7 Days clergy is defeated? It's not in this grandiose fight. It's actually with the person that they've been worshiping as a god coming in and just killing them because they misunderstood their beliefs. Like, that's how it ends. There's no giant fight with the 7 Days clergy. Like, it's literally they are defeated so easily. Because the whole point, in my opinion, wasn't the story of the 7 Days clergy building to this big fight. It's the story of them misrepresenting their god and their god getting angry at them and killing them with no remorse because they mistook what they believe to be true. And also it ends with their god, who we find out is a demon lord. Now, I will say, demon lord can be kind of misconstrued. I feel like they're using it as just a title. Demon lord doesn't necessarily mean demon in terms of hell. Now, granted, you do have to do some kind of bad things to get there, but it just kind of means all-powerful being, is kind of the way it's portrayed. And that's why it gets a little bit complex in the sense of, oh, they're a demon lord, they must be a terrible person. No, most of the demon lords are actually super gracious leaders of their people. They're just super, super powerful and did unfortunately have to do some pretty bad things to get that power. Rimuru has to kill 10,000, or I think it was 20,000 people to get that. Like 20,000 human beings have to die for Rimuru to become a demon lord. And it is done. And this is going back to, I can't remember if this was, I think this was the end of season 1, if not the very beginning of season 2. It is done in, oh my, I love this scene so much. So the way it's done is Rimuru has this mask, and they're in their human form. They have this mask that's supposed to hide their aura, their magic, because you typically exude a lot of magic, and Rimuru is extraordinarily powerful, so they're exuding a lot of magic. So they put this mask on to kind of hide their presence. And their country, the Jura Tempest Federation, is about to get attacked by the humans who have been misled by the 7 Days clergy. And Rimuru he's one of the biggest things that Rimuru's had is, we don't harm humans, we want to live faithfully with humans. And you see kind of a change in his character because he's realized that, so the reason he wants to become a demon lord is because these humans attacked while he was away and killed a bunch, like slaughtered a bunch of his friends. And he cannot cope with that. He actually can't cope with the fact that his friends died. So he is willing to do anything in his power to bring his friends back. I actually cried. It was a very beautiful scene where you see him snap. You see he's standing over the dead bodies of his friends. And this show is a little bit gory. It's not like, it's not just like, oh, no, it's like they have their guts slit. Like it's a little bit like, yeah.
Sure.
And Rimuru is standing over the dead body of specifically his secretary. And he's like, I can't cope with this. I will do absolutely anything. And this character comes in and tells him this story of the only way that you can resurrect people is there's this fairy tale from hundreds of years ago of someone who became a demon lord and used their powers as a demon lord to bring back their friends. And Rimuru is like, I will do absolutely anything. So Rimuru goes from this character who's like, absolutely never harm humans. We like, I used to be one. Like, we never want to cause harm. We want to this person who is a little bit more complex as a character in the sense of understanding there are bad humans out there and we're going to have to do something about that sometimes, because me saying don't kill humans led to my friends dying because they believe in me so much that they were willing to die to not harm humans. And Rimuru feels so much guilt and responsibility for putting his friends in that position, and the people who believe in him, they literally call him Lord Rimuru. Like, he is their savior. And he let them down in his own eyes. So back to the original scene, he puts on this mask and he slaughters 20,000 people, or so specifically, he slaughters 10,000 people without hesitation. He uses light and actually concentrates light down and just skewers them all. Like, it is a brutal scene, and it is done in such a masterful way of Rimuru has this mask, and you can see that he is devoid of anything because all he cares about is becoming a demon lord, and he's just slaughtering all these people. And then that's the first 10,000. The second 10,000, while he kills those first 10,000, he gains a new ability. And I can't remember what the new ability is called, but essentially what happens is anyone who loses the will to fight against him dies immediately. So he kills these 10,000 people, gets this new ability, and it's like, activate the ability. He like most monotone, like activate the ability. And then the other 10,000 soldiers who just watched their these 10,000 people die, they all just drop dead. Like their souls get lifted, they just drop dead. All that's left is the king who started this, his right-hand man, and a mage. And it is such a, again, like phenomenal scene in the sense of you're watching Rimuru go from, like, you're watching his evolution from a happy-go-lucky slime who just wants to live happily with everyone to a character who understands there are some actions that need to be taken that just, they're terrible actions, but it's what has to be done if I want my loved ones to live. There are people who are unfortunately never going to accept us, and I can't negotiate with these people. I have to kill them. I have to do what's necessary. Now, he becomes a demon lord, he revives all his friends, and then we go back to a little bit more happy-go-lucky. But that's like the story of season 2. And then season 3 is, now that he's become a demon lord, he wants to essentially present himself to the world as a demon. He wants to make the grandiose announcement to the world that I am a demon lord, because that means that people are less likely to mess with him. People are scared of the demon lords. Like there's only 8 of them. And people are terrified of them. Because again, the title of demon lord is scary. They know what it takes to become that demon lord. Him killing those 20,000 people to get to they know he is terrifying. And so how do they do that? They do it in the form of a festival. And it's you get a really fun balance in this 3rd season of that happy-go-lucky, like, oh, we're throwing a festival, everything's working out, we're gonna build a coliseum, we're gonna have battles, we're gonna have all these things. But you also have people who don't want this to work out. You have people who don't want this festival to succeed, and that's the conflict. Now, I heard before I even watched That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime that people didn't like season 3 because there wasn't as much battle. To them, I say, you have not watched seasons 1 and 2 because the entire point of this show is very clearly, and I think maybe you can even tell having not watched it, the point of the story is not the action. It's not the battles. The point of the story is the politics. It is the sitting down and negotiating with these foreign superpowers. And we literally have 2 whole episodes in this 3rd season where Rimuru is just meeting the leaders of the people who are under his domain. Because obviously he rules over this entire giant forest, and he's now declaring himself the leader and a ruler as a demon lord over all of these. So there's a bunch of sub-factions within that forest, and they're all presenting themselves to Rimuru. And this is where it's a really important time because he needs to not fuck this up. He needs to show I am a caring leader, but I'm also a leader who doesn't fuck around. Like if you do something bad, like I'm a demon lord and I am no longer afraid to take the actions that are necessary. And that character evolution, again, is super, super interesting. And again, you still have your happy-go-lucky, like joyful things. You have that junk food, but you also have that heart and that like care that was put into crafting a story about a slime who got reincarnated into another world. That again, I think is just I would say I'm surprised at how much I enjoyed this. I'll be totally honest. I did not expect to enjoy this story as much as I did. But I have. But enough about That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. I will talk about it again when season 4 releases, but unfortunately my last time talking about it anytime soon because I have finished it. Unless I do, there is a movie. I might watch the movie this week, and then I can talk about the That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime movie. But we'll see. Because it's technically not canon to the anime. It's just kind of a fun thing. And I don't watch all of those. Like I haven't even watched all the One Piece movies because the One Piece movies aren't canon. So I typically I like to stay with canon stuff when it comes to movies. I have seen some of the One Piece movies and I do plan on watching all the One Piece movies. But again, with anime, it's like a little bit more difficult just because of a time thing. I want to watch so many things that watching something that is never going to come back is whatever. But anyway, enough about that. I also have continued reading Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. Dude, this story is phenomenal. It really is I dare to say, and I'm about halfway through now. I am almost exactly halfway through. I can actually check, but I believe I'm on episode like 160 or 70 something. I'm opening up Webtoons to check right now. I am on episode 170. That's the episode I'm reading right now. And there's a little over 300 episodes.
Okay.
Of the web novel. So I do find it hard to call it a masterpiece, even though I think what I've read up into this point is a masterpiece. I don't want to call the entire show a masterpiece just because I haven't finished it yet, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, essentially. And it's still ongoing, even once I get to that 300 mark. It is still ongoing, but dude, this story is so good. When it gets adapted into an anime, you're watching it immediately. Like, I am making you watch this immediately. Again, it hasn't topped One Piece or anything like that, but I think if this story continues being as good as it is going to be a top 5 story for me. Because the character growth, like, not necessarily even the character, the complexity of the characters in the sense of, I guess I'll bring up an example of one of the things that's happened in the past, like chapter or episodes that I've read is the next scenario, or I guess technically there's been 2 scenarios that I've read through since I last talked about it. One of the scenarios is they're essentially put into this other world. They're isekai'd into another world. Okay. And they're presented with every scenario that they run into. There's that main challenge that they have to complete. And obviously, Dokja, the main character, has read the story before. So, and that's actually an interesting thing because we're getting to the point where he's done so many things to change this story that he's having a harder and harder time predicting where things are going to go. And it's actually getting him in trouble. Which again, I think is just done. If everything just worked out for him every single time and nothing deviated from the original story, it'd be like, okay, that's a little far-fetched. He's changed so many things. The story has to have changed at this point. Yeah. And he is actually getting in trouble because of that now. There's been some moments where he's like, oh, this is going to work out for me because I already know where the story is going to go. And all of a sudden you have that moment where he has that realization of, oh shit, this isn't the story that I know because I've already changed so many things. Yeah. But anyway, the 2 main arcs that happened was, one, they're isekai'd into this other world. It's called Peace Land. It's this land that is these really, it's basically tiny people. They're like this tall. And they are the ruling race or ruling beings of this world. And the main characters who get brought in there, they're presented with the challenge, and the challenge says, lead the ruling race of this world to extinction. So essentially, their job is to slaughter all of the tiny people on this planet, and basically become the catastrophes that they just stopped for their own world in the last scenario. Because in the last scenario before this, they had to stop the catastrophes who were ready to wipe out their world. Now, they just stopped their own world from being destroyed. They are now becoming the catastrophes to wipe out this other world. And obviously, that's a huge moral quandary, because if they don't do it, they're presented as they will die. So what would you do in order to survive? Are you willing to not just kill someone or kill, literally, the challenge isn't kill this racist leader, it is literally lead them to extinction.
Kill the racist leader.
That means kill every single, you're leading them off the face of the earth. Are you willing to lead another race to extinction just for your own benefit? Now, there are characters who get isekai'd into this other world who immediately start slaughtering. They just immediately start killing, brutally murdering these tiny people because, they want to survive. They're presented with a scenario. Now, this is where Dokja's prior knowledge comes in handy, because he knows that if he doesn't kill any of them, he'll be presented with a secondary scenario. Now, that secondary scenario is a long time afterwards. Like, he has to wait like quite a while for the scenario to come up. And in the meantime, he's being chased by the people who are actually killing the small people, because Dokja's trying to stop them from killing the small people, and they don't like Dokja trying to stop him. And his friends, he has his other friends with him. You have I'm going to screw up all their names, but you have Pildu comes back, one of my favorite characters in the entire manhwa. Pildu is a greedy bastard, but he is amazing. He is so funny. You have Sangha, I believe is maybe how you pronounce her name, kind of the main love interest of the story. Even though this story doesn't really play into love all that much, it is still interesting. But anyway, they're isekai'd into this other world. They have to kill all the small people. And basically, if they don't kill the small people, they themselves then become small. They actually shrink down to the size of these people. And that's when they're presented with the next scenario of, okay, you didn't want to do this scenario. Your actual scenario is prevent these people from going extinct. And again, that's where Dokja's prior knowledge comes in, where they could have easily just slaughtered them and they would have technically completed the scenario. But is that a morally right thing to do? No, it's not. Like, I think we can all agree that the extinction of another race for your own benefit is not a morally great thing to do. I mean, yeah, but he gets presented with a second scenario, and that's where he now has to fight as a little person, as this tiny little creature, against full-size human beings who are looming over him. And I won't get too much more into detail on that because I don't want to talk about the other arcs that I read. But after that, it's just phenomenal action. The art in this never ceases to amaze me. It is beautifully drawn. It takes advantage of the fact that it's written on a straight, like, sometimes you'll literally have to turn your phone sideways and you'll just scroll, and it's just one of the most beautiful art splashes you'll ever see of action or a character like moment. It is phenomenally drawn as always. The next scenario I don't know if this is technically the next, but another scenario that they're put into is he actually goes to the underworld. So I think I talked about last week that one of the catastrophes they befriend, but then they're forced to kill. He can't accept that catastrophe died. He doesn't want to accept the fact that they're dead. So he actually makes a deal with Persephone, the wife of Hades, because that's the thing. Some of these myths, the whole point of the story, or not the whole point, but a big thing of the story is these myths that we know, whether that be the Olympians, whether that be the Garden of Eden and Jesus, they're actually real. And all of them are real at the exact same time, which is a very interesting thing. But Dokja makes a deal with Persephone. Specifically, he actually makes a deal with the god of ecstasy, and god of alcohol and ecstasy, who is the child of Persephone. But anyways, he goes to the underworld and he has to essentially swoon the Persephone into allowing him to take the catastrophe's soul back, which he semi-succeeds at. It's actually really interesting where, again, it doesn't go exactly as he planned, but it ends in a way that is still ongoing. So I can only talk so much about it just because I don't know where it ended up. But you have that, and then the scenario that we're currently in, or it's not really a scenario, the next scenario is essentially all the characters in each dome are put into this. There is a church who comes in, who is essentially their entire goal as a church. And it's called a church because it's a cult. It's not trying to play on religion necessarily. It's literally just a cult that's called a church. But their whole goal is to free everyone of the scenarios. They want to. Their basically whole point is like, why are we bowing down to these beings who are making us go through all these terrible things? And the leader of this cult is someone who is a reincarnator. So essentially, and it's actually explained how their powers work, and it's really, really interesting. And that is, every time they die, they don't get reincarnated the way that you would think. Their soul actually takes over the body of the thing that, well, it takes over a new body that is born into the world at the same time of his death, but that body is of the same species that killed him. So he, like, for instance, he becomes a snake because in one of his lives, I can't remember exactly what he was when he got killed by a snake, because it's gone over pretty quickly in like a flashback sequence. But it ultimately goes to, he is killed by a human, and in his next life, he is reborn as a human. Or I should say they, because technically they're like, their gender is a big question mark, because they aren't necessarily like, gender doesn't matter when you're reborn into a different body, whether it be male or female, every single time. Like, it's not really a construct that matters to them, because again, they start out as like nothing. They start out as like a bug animated, and then they get killed by a snake, and they get reincarnated as a snake. And anyways, this character has a really big emotional connection to the, I cannot pronounce his name, but Jungkook. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he is essentially the like main character of the original story that Dokja read. And the only reason they have this emotional connection is because that character Jungkook, or whatever his name is, I Korean names are hard, okay, man, I'm sorry. But it is they understand the being reborn thing, because his whole thing is he's a regressor who gets reborn after he dies as well. It's a little bit different than a reincarnator, but they feel this like personal connection. And ultimately, to stop my rambling, what ends up happening is they get put into a scenario where they are being bombarded with stronger and stronger monsters every 4 hours. And there's two ways to survive the scenario. One, defeat all the monsters, which is literally impossible, because the monsters will get to levels in which you just cannot beat. Or the strongest character in the dome has to die. Now, they don't know who the strongest character is. There's a comment that's made of, oh, well, the strongest character will know who they are. So everyone starts making assumptions about who the strongest characters are. A lot of people believe that it's the leader of this cult, because the leader of this cult is very, very strong. They're very, very powerful. But most people believe that the strongest character is the main character of the original story, that I will not even try and pronounce this. Jay. We'll call him Jay, because I'm not going to try and pronounce his name again. But most people believe that Jay is the strongest. Because again, he is the main character of the original story. He's the protagonist. He has to be the strongest. Turns out that that's not the case. It's actually Dokja, the main character that we're following. And he actually, like, he pits the cult leader and Jay against each other in a fight to make people believe, oh, they're the two strongest characters, clearly, so they have to fight each other to kill each other to end the scenario. Meanwhile, Dokja's over in the background basically killing himself. Because now, granted, he can come back for reasons, whatever, he's not actually gonna die. But he's literally dies. Like, he does die, but he can come back from the dead, because of reasons. And he's going through all of this while distracting everyone with the fight. By the way, one of the most beautifully drawn fights. Again, phenomenal art. The dichotomy between the two characters of Jay and the leader of this cult, whose name is also too hard to pronounce, so we're just going to call him the leader of the cult, is really interesting. Of, like, I guess, the motivations of each character. And one of them wants to, like, essentially, it turns out that the leader of this cult, it's like, I've never experienced true death before, so I don't really have any remorse for killing and other human beings. Like, I actually don't care ultimately as much as I say I do. I ultimately don't, because I've never experienced death, so I don't understand the gravity of it. And Jay does understand the gravity of it, but also has that degree of every time I die, I can just come back, but it works very differently, where he goes back to the start of the entire scenario and story. He doesn't go back to where he was. He doesn't get born into another body. He just comes back. And it's, again, their dialogue while they're fighting is just so well written. And in that fight of what's right, and like, is it right to just kill because you can be reborn and because you don't understand death?
Sure.
Yeah. I have so much more to say on this, but I will stop rambling. Because ultimately where we end up and where we're at now is Dokcha is finally able to have an audience with the constellations, who are essentially the people who are watching these scenarios. Because I don't think I've talked about this before. I told you, all of this is being live streamed. Like, the whole point of this is being live. Them going through all these scenarios is being live streamed for the entertainment of these constellation beings.
Yeah.
And he now has an opportunity to have an audience with these beings. And that's kind of where we leave off. Which, again, it goes back to that, like, now his knowledge isn't really helping him because he doesn't know who to trust. They're these really powerful beings who only care about entertainment and only care about themselves. So who does he trust? Who does he make deals with? Who does he not make deals with? And we still don't know where that's going. But I'm curious to see where that goes. Now, typically, the way we would end this off is I'd ask you the next question of where are you at in One Piece, and you would ask me where am I at in Game of Thrones. We had a conversation before we started, and what we're going to do, we're going to continue the segment, but it's going to change a little bit. We're going to be moving it to once a month. Because we're watching so many other different things, and especially as Andor and all that kicks off, it's going to be harder and harder to watch. Like, I'm going to be totally honest, I watched 0 episodes of Game of Thrones this week. I'll call myself out. It's not necessarily the reason that we're cutting this. It's not the sole reason. But it is, we're both finding it harder and harder to watch enough of the content to talk about it every single week, because we want to watch. Again, I watched Reincarnated Slime. I'm reading Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. Starting in a few weeks, it's going to be Andor. And lastly, like, there's a lot of stuff to watch. So we're still going to be watching those things, and we're still going to talk about those things. So don't get discouraged. It's just going to be on a monthly basis now. So it's going to be the first week of every single month. So funny enough, next week is the first week of April. So we actually will talk about those things. But we will be moving to monthly. So next week you'll get it, but then you won't see it again until the start of May. Will be the next update that we give. So I just wanted to give that preference before, unless you have anything else to say on that. I think we can actually go ahead and segue into the next segment, unless you have anything you want to say.
Yeah, I was going to add that, as we add more segments, as more things come in and we want to add more things, this is going to be the norm. We introduce a segment. The only two staples we're really going to have is what have you been consuming, and then the main topic. We might add a segment here or there, but those are things like we might do them consistently for a week just so we get used to them, so that the audience knows what the segment's about. But then we're going to put them on specific dates of, like, okay, a month from this date is when we'll do this segment again, or a few weeks from this date, or however far out. Similar to the what was the weekly checkup, which is now the monthly checkup. Which I think we also always kind of talked about. That was always going to be the plan. But now that there's been a few episodes and we've had the time to digest it, understand how we were going to do it, it's going forward with the plan of, making it monthly.
Yeah, and this show is obviously going to evolve over time. We've actually, Carson, I don't know if you realize this, we're at episode 4, which means we've done this for a full month, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Woohoo! Celebrate!
And But I want this show to go on for years and years and years. And I think when something like I love doing this, I actually super look forward to this every single week. I love talking about things. I want to talk with you, Carson, because I'm actually thinking of I have a few other ideas about things. But let's just say I love sharing my thoughts with people. I want to get better at it. This podcast is allowing me to get better about being more, I guess, thoughtful when I'm watching something, and also more thoughtful in how I explain things. There's still a lot of areas that I struggle in, but this show is going to evolve with us over time as we do this for hopefully the next 4 years, not just 4 weeks. So, but yeah. Anyways, with all that being said, Carson, are you ready to kick off? Do you have your list ready?
I just pulled it up.
I have a question for you. Do we want to both say what our lists are and then go back and forth like we typically do? Or because these are completely different lists, are you wanting to go all your top fives, me, my top fives? How do you want to do this? Because we did not talk about this in advance.
I think that's probably for the best that we do it all at once.
Okay.
It's going to get really confusing. As opposed to talking about one topic, we have 2 separate topics entirely.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll go ahead as the host, as we typically do. Kick it off to you, actually. I'm the one to drive the conversation. You're the one to have the conversation. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick it off to you. First, tell me what your top 5 is, and then just start rattling off your top 5, however you want.
My top 5 is my top 5 favorite musicals. Again, as we've talked about.
Okay, so you did take my idea. You did.
Unfortunately, that was my idea, and then it kind of had to become, an idea that you gave me because you kind of said it first. But it's whatever.
I mean, look at your shirt, dude. It's not. You're a stage actor. Look at your shirt. It's not hard to guess what top 5 for you is going to be. But anyways, I will let you. I'll try. This is your top 5. I still will probably chime in here or there, especially if I've seen things or if I have questions. But since this is your top 5, I will go ahead and hand it off to you.
Yeah, and you'll recognize a good amount of these shows too. I don't think personally that they're like you're not gonna know some of these. But an honorable mention that I love this show. I think it's musically, lyrically written. It's one of the most complex shows I've ever seen. I do think that some people always say it's overrated. I don't think that at all. And that is Into the Woods. Into the Woods tells the story of Brother Grimm's fairy tales that all combine and they all come together in a very Avengers Endgame style story. And then it all goes wrong in the second act. The first act is all about how the fairy tales play out. They play out normally. They might overlap. Some stories might overlap. And then act 2 is all about, oh, shoot. The aftermath of our stories, it's all coming back to haunt us. What do we do? Like Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack is in the story, and after he slays the first giant after chopping down the beanstalk, what happens? Another beanstalk accidentally grows, and there's another giant who's the wife of the giant he killed. So what do? You have to deal with that. I think Into the Woods is genuinely like it's just a very creative story. It never gets enough credit for what it does. I think the music is beautiful. I think the story is beautiful. And so honestly, that's why I want it to be an honorable mention, because I do truly love the story that it gives and the music that it gives. With that being said, my number 5, and this will be a shocking one for any musical theater listeners right now, is actually The Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz has been a part of my childhood for as long as I can remember. One of my favorite memories of it was there was a back in Illinois, a midnight showing of The Wizard of Oz, and then at like 11 o'clock they showed like a documentary about it that talked about the making of it, how it's impacted people all these years, and
the making of the musical or the movie.
The movie. I should be more specific.
Because there's because
I'm talking about the movie
because I know there's the musical, there's the movie, and there is the book that it's all based on.
The book.
Yeah.
Well, the movie was a big part of my childhood, and so we go to this midnight showing. It's me, it's my brothers, my mom, and my grandma, and I remember being the most excited little kid for this movie because I love The Wizard of Oz. I love the Scarecrow. I love the Cowardly Lion, the Tin Man. I love all the songs. And the documentary ends at like 12:30 or something, and I'm passed out. Because all I wanted was to see the movie in theaters, and they waited so long to show it. It was like 1:00 before they actually started it. And I even remember telling my mom, like, this was like months ago, because I just remembered that we even did that. And I go, why was I even there? What made you think that I would be able to stay awake or be able to handle that?
Me, a tiny child awake to watch something. Yeah.
But Wizard of Oz, as a movie being so special to me, it was one of the films that made me love musicals, made me love singing, made me love dancing. And then that leads into the musical, which I actually was blessed and had the opportunity to be a part of a little more than 2 years ago. Getting to tell that story, getting to step into that world, getting to be one of the characters in that show was just incredible. I think it's such a simple story, and its music is so iconic. The sets, the practicality of everything, it's so well done, man. I mean, it screams classic musical to me whenever I watch The Wizard of Oz or I see a production of it. Like, that is classic 1930s musical to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say the musical came out so long ago, and the book came out even longer before. Like you're talking classics. Like
I'm talking.
I guess not classics. It wasn't like Beethoven era, but like it is when we think of classics, it is one from a long time ago that very much has cemented itself in the modern psyche. Mainly because you have so many remakes and spin-offs with things like Wicked and things like that. But
well, and specifically, I do funny enough, I'm glad this actually pulled up. I pulled down my lock screen, and it's a photo of me in the show. It's horrible quality, but you can kind of get it. That's the Emerald City Guard. But no,
the most pivotal character, Emerald City Guard number 7. That's 7.
No, I played a dual role of Uncle Henry and the Emerald City Guard because I mean, this is one of the things of what I love about Wizard of Oz is the fact that it's a dreamland. That's essentially what they're trying to say with what Oz is. Dorothy goes to Oz, and all these characters reminder of the people that are important to her. The Scarecrow's a farmhand, the Tin Man's a farmhand, the Cowardly Lion's a farmhand, Miss Gulch is the Wicked Witch, and in this version, in the musical version, which I actually love, they also add Uncle Henry and Auntie Em into it. They're never in the movie as a double casted character, but in the musical, Uncle Henry plays the guard as like a parallel to basically be like, okay, Uncle Henry was supposed to protect her, and yet he's off doing his own thing, preparing for the storm, and he wasn't there to protect her. And Dorothy feels that, and that's why he's the guard in this reality. Auntie Em is a guiding force in Dorothy's life, and somebody who's always steered her in the right direction. And of course, because she's with Uncle Henry, doesn't give Dorothy that proper guidance. And that's why she has the dual role of Glinda, who sets Dorothy on the path down the Yellow Brick Road all the way to Oz.
Yeah.
I just think it's a beautiful parallel. It's great. It's one of the only things I think the musical has ever done like correctly and like changing, because they add both those parallels. But then it's just like when it's a musical, man, the numbers are bigger, they're bolder.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I love that musical. I think it's so well done. I really hope I can do it again at some point too. Same role, different role, I don't care. My heart's just so close to that musical that I couldn't have thought of any better spot than to put it at number 5. Number 4, my number 4 favorite we're switching trains from classic musicals, and we're hopping over to Disney classics, and that is Disney's Beauty and the Beast.
Okay.
I've loved that musical. I've loved the soundtrack, and I know what you're gonna say because my senior year of high school, I did this show. I'm not biased because of that. I genuinely think Disney's Beauty and the Beast is one of the best musicals ever made. I think this if you've seen any like the old production stuff that they've released from like when it originally was on Broadway, the sets are massive. They're so cool. The prosthetics for the Beast are really cool. The costumes, the lights, all of it. It's one of the most technically marvelous productions I think ever. And then obviously you have that Disney classic story of, you know, Belle finding the Beast, Gaston wanting to be with Belle. Gaston's really the Beast. It's not about what's on the outside, but what's on the inside that counts. You know, it's that classic story. And I the additions they also make into this musical, you know, you look at all these Disney musicals specifically, and they add things, they extend the runtime, and a lot of it isn't needless, but it's not as good as what the rest of the story has to offer. And I think that the musical version of Beauty and the Beast, and I'll just say, I think it's better than the movie. I think that they add everything, they do everything just right.
Well, I was going to ask, there's obviously you have the original animated movie, but then you have because if I remember correctly, the order of operations is you have the original animated movie, then the musical, then the live action remake with Emma Watson.
Yeah, Emma Stone. Emma Stone did not play Belle. That would have been horrible.
With Emma Watson. So that was the order, right? That it was released in? Okay.
Yes. The movie came out in 91. The musical, I believe, came out in 94.
Okay.
So it wasn't like too long after.
It wasn't that long. Well, because again, all of this is based off of books or a book, which I will say, I've read the original book, like the original book of Beauty and the Beast. I did it in high school for an assignment. And that story is very different from any of the stories, like the musical version, the live action movie, the animated, like it's all very different, like from the book. I mean, that's kind of how it works with all the Disney stuff. I know Little Mermaid is super different as well. Like
Hunchback of Notre Dame is also very different. Actually, fun fact about that, the musical version of Hunchback of Notre Dame is very different from the movie version of Hunchback of Notre Dame. So it's all different. It's great. But no, talking about the story, because you brought up a good point. I think the story is one of the most beautifully crafted. I honestly think ever, especially for a musical. It's so simple at its core, but then it tells such a deeper connected story with, you know, you're watching the Beast just be tormented by his choices and how he never can learn to love, and he truly believes that he's lost. The servants also in some way have lost faith, and they believe that they've lost too. And then along comes this girl, and surprisingly to everybody, you know, the story of Beauty and the Beast is timeless. I think it's one of the best. The music, oh my God, hearing it in a Broadway style and not just like a Disney animated movie, it's so good.
Dude, some of those songs, they're all-timers, like phenomenal. I mean, the pinnacle song of Beauty and the Beast, that's a phenomenal song. I will admit, my favorite song of Beauty and the Beast, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it is a live action movie exclusive song. It's Evermore.
Evermore.
I believe Evermore was specifically written for the Emma Watson live action movie.
It was.
I've seen the musical and I've seen the animated movie, and I don't remember hearing it. But I'm just gonna come out and say it. That is my favorite song. It's actually one of my favorite songs of all time. I know we're talking about the live, like the Broadway musical version, but like talking about music, Evermore. God, dude, I'll literally it'll be like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'll like sit down to do something, and I'll put that song on repeat. Like,
well, it's very funny you say that, because the thing I was literally going to say after is I love all the songs. However, my favorite song is the Beast song they added for the musical, which is "If I Can't Love Her." I think it is one of the one of the best male ballads ever written. I think that the way the shot is the shot, the way the stage is lit, the way the costumes are, I think the way everything's laid out, it just makes that song so beautiful. I use it for any audition I'm in, just because you can pack so much emotion into such a small amount of time. And so I think it's really funny that you say Evermore is probably one of your favorite songs ever, because the other, If I Can't Love Her, is one of my favorite songs ever. Same character, same show, different way of going about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Beauty and the Beast is just phenomenal. And that's why it's my number 4. I love it to death. Number 3, not surprising to you, I know it's not going to be surprising to you, is 42nd Street. I also had the chance.
Wow, really? I couldn't tell you've even seen it before. I didn't know. I would never have guessed. Like, wow, wow. Oh my goodness.
Because it's a classic musical, I'll give a breakdown of it for anybody who's listening. 42nd Street is about a small town girl wanting to make it big on Broadway, and she finds a place in this massive company of people who become friends to her, and it's all about how she rises up to play the leading role in a show when nobody else is able to step up and do it. Again, as an actor, I think that this show completely represents what Broadway is, or even what it was. I think it's magical. I think if you're a fan of musicals in general, I think this is the number 1 show that you need to watch, or at least have seen once, because it really does tell a story for like that just like breaks through to you as like a struggling actor and whatnot. I think that there's just like I don't know how to say it. There's just like such a special thing about this musical that I think never gets old. I think the music is phenomenal. And I think the biggest draw of this musical is the dancing. Absolutely.
The shirt you're wearing now is from when you did 42nd Street in high school, and I ran lights for that show. Back in high school. And yeah, like the singing was really good. And the songs are amazing, but dude, the dance numbers, I feel like that was the big thing for that year, was that the dance numbers they'd always done vocally strong shows, and they had a lot of dancing in them because that's just Broadway shows. But like 42nd Street, some of those dance numbers were, first of all, super long, like impressively long. But also grandiose scale, in the sense of you have everyone on stage. And even when you don't, because it's such a tap-heavy show, tap dancing is something that is really cool to watch when a bunch of people are doing it. But then you have your scenes where it's only a few characters that are pumping out some tap dance numbers, and every single time it's just choreographed like phenomenal.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, obviously the big opening number is a massive 5-minute tap song, which I think you know better than anybody. I was dying that entire time, front and center. I wanted to die. I wanted to just go curl up into a ball and cry. That show is physically demanding, but it was one of the most rewarding processes I've ever been a part of, purely just because of what I was able to accomplish as an actor with that show. But it's like you said, the dancing is incredible, and it's every single number. It's not just like one number. There's not one number in that show that, you know, it is all so well choreographed. Every iteration of that show is so well choreographed. I love the music. I think it tells the story very beautifully. Lullaby of Broadway being one of the best Broadway songs I think ever. It captures everything about what Broadway is and what it can be. And I think when done right on the stage, it brings just such an energy and a liveliness to it. I again love the story. I think it's funny. I think it's charming. It's also one of the musicals that people ask, is there any musical that you could ever actually see being done in modern day with a modern day twist? Or potentially, is there any show that you could be seeing made into a movie set in modern times? And I've always gone back to 42nd Street. I think that it would work so well. And I think that its story can work in almost any period of time ever. I think it's beautiful. I love it. But enough about 42nd Street. Number 2 on my list is the musical Jersey Boys, which I don't even know if you know what this is. Jersey Boys.
I've heard of it before, but I know I've never seen it before. And I didn't know you loved it. So like, I'm curious to hear about this. This is like the other ones aren't like super shocking. I've actually, like you said, I've seen you in some of those, but
my number 1 for you, Brandon, is really not going to be shocking. You could already probably know what it's going to be. But yeah,
probably
talking about Jersey Boys. Jersey Boys tells the true story of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons coming together as a band in the 50s into the 60s and creating what is probably one of the most famous quartet groups of all time and creating some of the most iconic songs of all time. Whereas 42nd Street was a very dance-heavy show, Jersey Boys is a massive singing show, and very evidently so with all the harmonies and almost every song is a quartet song. There's not there is an ensemble, they do sing, but it's not an ensemble show. It is these 4 guys on stage harmonizing, singing their hearts out, while at the same time telling a very beautiful story of these 4 guys who find each other and just happen to make it big. It's the story of them coming together. It's the story of their eventual fallout as a band, because one person is a gambling addict and blows a lot of their money. It's the story of these guys realizing that it's not just about the music, like it's about their families, and that sometimes they need to step away because they want to be able to spend time with their families. I mean, this is a show I've always wanted to be a part of. I think that it's story-wise very emotional. Musically, it's very impressive, and I just love the way that the story is written, purely from like the perspective of this is something that did happen in the past, but they allude a lot to the future, like about how Frankie Valli is still technically out there singing, and they talk about the deaths of the 2 members of the band. At least now they do. Before Tommy DeVito died, it was they only talked about one member of the group dying with Nick, and they have like a beautiful send off in the finale, and then they all come back together and they sing a big finale. It's so visually and beautifully well done. And as somebody who not only is a big fan of the musical, I love the Four Seasons. I think their music is inspirational. Their songs are simple, especially because of the time period that's from. But like, I think what is so cool about their songs is they use the full piece orchestras. They were so clever in how they went about writing a song, and their tunes are so catchy that when you get to the musical, even though you know these songs, you can't help but sing along. They're so good. Jersey Boys is one of the musicals I actually would probably recommend to you, because I do think genuinely you would enjoy it. For the humor.
Has it been turned into a movie or anything, or is it just I have to find it on Broadway?
No, it actually has. Funny enough, the guy who played Frankie Valli on Broadway, who originated it, plays Frankie Valli in the movie, and it's actually directed by Clint Eastwood. Yeah, that was one of the ones when they released that. When I saw it for the first time, I was like, Clint Eastwood? What? All right.
Out of all people, okay.
And the movie's good. It's fine. I still think the musical is so much better, but the movie's good.
Okay.
It's worth a watch if you wanted to check out the story. But no, I mean, there's not much more I can say about it beyond it's just such a really unique story. And it being a true story, and with the music being very catchy, songs that you know, songs that you love, it really just drags you in. And I don't know, I love every second of the musical. I really hope that I can do it one day. Number one, Brandon. I think you know exactly where I'm going with this. And my number one is Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah. I know you're not really surprised about that. Sweeney Todd is the greatest show of all time. It is musically the most beautiful score I've ever heard. It is written in such a manner that from the first musical cues, when you see a character, it alludes to where their character is going to end up. Its music has its own character arc. It's beautiful. Yeah. The story of a man who is broken and has lost everything and been thrown away by life, and coming back for revenge to avenge the loss of his family, is one of the darkest but the most impactful and incredible stories I think that has ever been put to stage. Now, the reason Brandon's not so surprised is, yes, I've talked about this a lot with him. I also played the role of Sweeney Todd a few years ago, and just doing that, it was always my favorite musical, but getting an opportunity to do that really also gave me a new appreciation for the show. I got to dive into the show itself and really found out all of the character beats, all of the emotions, and especially when you're playing the title character, you go through everything. I mean, that show, it has some of the most integral, intentional, just moments within its, like, when I mean within its music, like it literally has like the most, how do you say it? I don't even know how you say it. Like it's so difficult to say, but like you listen to the music, and in one moment like the music is talking about a specific character, and as the music plays while the characters are talking, you hear the music change, or it'll subtly hint at, okay, this is a musical cue for Sweeney, which means death later in the musical, or as Sweeney kills somebody, this means death. This is the sound you hear, and you hear just a snippet of it when you're introduced to this character. Oh, okay, that means this character is going to die by the end of the show. You know that's going to happen. It's so well done and so well crafted. And Stephen Sondheim, who is just an absolute musical genius, also wrote Into the Woods, if people don't know, just did a phenomenal job. And he didn't hold back. He let his imagination run. He told the story, which Sweeney Todd is based off of I don't know if it's technically a real event or if it's a story. There was a guy named Sweeney Todd who was a barber who killed people, which is kind of what this is based off of. The story itself is twisted. It's obviously different, but from that perspective, I think Sondheim did a great job crafting the world that it's in. And at the end of the day, I think it's the biggest cautionary tale, which is, they say it at the end of the show, to seek revenge may lead to hell, which is never take revenge. It just, I'm not saying, don't avenge, but, don't go down
there's a difference
the
between avenge and revenge.
Don't go down the dark path,
Yeah.
Things happen, and you have to just, dude, it's just such a really well-crafted musical, and I tear up every single time I listen to that soundtrack, because of how much emotion's packed into it. The costumes, oh my god, dude. The costumes are so simple. It's London attire, but then they pick the right color so that when somebody's killed, the blood is shown so easily. It's the set design of it being literally, for the Broadway show, the set design of this is very different from the one you saw. It's a big, massive cube that just rotates on stage, and the cube, like, front is the Miss Lovett's pie shop, and at the top it is Sweeney's barbershop. They have a staircase on the side, and as Sweeney kills somebody, they turn the cube around, You see him go down the chair, and you see him slide directly into an oven. It is brilliant. It's so good. And so I don't know, man. And like, there's nothing more I can say about it. It's just so well done. It's so well crafted. I love that show to death. It is my number one. Nothing will ever replace it. But with that being said, enough of my boring old musicals. Brandon, what's your topic? Give me your top 5. Go for it.
So I didn't tell you this. My top 5, funny enough, is also my top 5 favorite musicals.
What? No, it's not. There's no way. Is it really?
Yeah. Yeah.
What? That's insane. Oh my gosh. I did not expect that. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't have an honorable mention. I'll just jump in with my number 5. And that is Hamilton. I'm kidding, Carson. I'm kidding. My top 5 is not musical.
I was about to say, what? There's no way. Like, there's no way that this is exactly what we're doing right now. I'm like, you are like, no. Stop right there. Get rid of the list. Do something else. I know exactly what your top 5 is going to be. There's no way it's not what I'm thinking. But I know it ain't musicals. That's for sure.
Sorry, I'm looking down because I obviously wrote it down as well. I don't have my top 5 is Carson already knows it because was my first idea when I first talked about it. It is my favorite books, and I will say /book series. Because I have a hard time picking individual books from series. Funny enough, there are I'll go ahead and spoil it. There are 3 series on here and 2 individual books. So I'll go ahead and say that right off the bat. So it is books /book series. Obviously I might have a favorite book from a series, but I still like thinking of it as a series as a whole. Because they're not written as a one-off. The whole point of those books isn't to be a one-off, it's to be a part of a story. I do have an honorable mention. It's a very silly honorable mention, which is why it didn't make my top 5. But that would be the Magic Treehouse books. They are what got me into reading. I up to a certain point into even high school, I was still reading every single one of those books. They're just fun, like just one-off stories that tell history or mythos or whatever of these kids in a Magic Treehouse. I think it's just a fun ride. I think even till this day, if you want to get your kids into reading, if I ever have kids, I'm going to that's going to be one of the first series that they read is going to be Magic Treehouse. Just because I enjoyed it so much. It was just, again, I read it into high school. Like, it was just a fun, like, very short, like 100-page stories. But yeah, that's my honorable mention. My number 5 is technically not technically, it is an audiobook. It is only written in, I think it started as an audiobook and it has since become, they have printed physical book copies of it. And that would be Dooku Jedi Lost. So Carson, I don't know how much, I don't know if have you ever listened to Dooku Jedi Lost? I know I've talked to you about it before.
I know what it is. You've talked to me about it. I've heard other people talk about it. So yeah, I know what it is.
So essentially, to give a brief synopsis of the story, the whole crux of the story is we start off with him as a Sith. So we already start off with him as a Sith with his at the time his Padawan being Asajj Ventress. Obviously you have the rule of 2, so this was back when Dooku was the Sith. Sure. And he had his, other than Palpatine, but he was like the Sith at the time. And he had his Padawan Asajj Ventress. Sure. And the story's kind of told from 2 different, like, not points of view, but it's told in 2 different times. So the story is watching Dooku be a master to Asajj, but it's also a story of Dooku's backstory. You get basically through flashback sequences. Like, so essentially Asajj, the whole reason you're getting these is because Asajj is finding out herself in real time in the modern era of the story about Dooku's backstory, and then you'd kind of flash and get the Dooku backstory. And it is telling why he became a Sith. Because here's the thing. If you've only seen Dooku in the movies, one interesting thing that you might note about him, and I rewatched the prequels not that long ago. I think it was like barely a year ago. And in one interesting thing that you'll notice is Dooku is a Sith, obviously, but his actions are always a little bit weird for a Sith. They're never pure evil necessarily. You could always tell that there's additional layers with Dooku's actions. And I think it's done I shouldn't say very subtly in the movies. Like if you look for it, you can tell, but it's never like deliberately called out. Like he is still evil, he is still a Sith, but you can see that there's some hesitancy in him in this audiobook, or at the time audio drama, and now they've printed into a physical book. Is kind of explaining to you why Dooku is the way he is, and come to find out that Dooku had an abusive family. Once it was found out that he was strong with the Force, his dad was terrified. His dad was terrified of the fact that he had the Force, so he was neglected. He was abused and neglected. Eventually the Jedi come and rescue him. But he always still has that part of him that kind of resents the Force. That was given to him because of what it did to his family relations. And then what kind of leads him a little bit down the dark side is he eventually goes back to his home world with Asajj. And again, this is where the story kind of kicks off with the flashbacks, is his once thought to be dead sister is still alive and is actually a criminal on his home world. And one of the big things with the Jedi is you have to give up familiar connections. You can't care about your family. You can't be involved with your family whatsoever. Once you become a Jedi, you cut off all ties of like, whether that be relationship love or family love or whatever it might be. So he had no problem with doing that originally, because he didn't like his family. Like it was easy. He thought his sister was dead. He cut off all of his family. When he goes back to his homeworld for a mission and finds out that his sister is still alive, he kind of has an internal struggle of, okay, I want to be close to my sister again, but I technically can't because of the Jedi. And it's telling that story of kind of like him being corrupted, but again, he's never truly evil. And because of this story, Dooku has become one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars. I think he is top 2 for me, to be totally honest with you. Number 1 for me is Anakin / Darth Vader. And I think number 2 is Dooku. And it is solely because of this, because it kind of makes him out to be not necessarily an anti-hero, but you can tell that he isn't it tells you the story of him being a Sith, but not because he holds like just anger in his heart or just because he wants to be evil. It's because he just doesn't believe in the Jedi practices. And I think that's one of the reasons why Ahsoka would probably be my number 3, is because Ahsoka has a very similar journey when I talked about last week with Clone Wars. Now, she becomes a gray Jedi. And now I do think that Dooku had the potential to become a gray Jedi. He was just corrupted into becoming a Sith. But I think that getting that background on Dooku, just again, like having like I obviously I watched the prequels way before the book even came out, and then I watched the prequel. I read the book, and then I watched the prequels again, not necessarily because of this, but I watched it later on, and I'm watching Dooku's character, and I'm like, no, this like it makes so much more sense than I don't think that they necessarily wrote all of this when they originally wrote the movies, so. Obviously, a lot of this is probably going retrospectively and kind of becoming that prequel of like, oh, how do we tell Dooku's story and how do we backtrack on that and how do we make it make sense? I think they did a phenomenal job of doing that, in the sense of you look at Dooku when you're watching the movies, and again, I don't want to keep harping on this point, but like you're like, some of his actions don't make total sense for him being a pure Sith.
Sure, yeah.
And you flash back and it makes sense why he's not a pure Sith. And again, this is told in 2 different kind of story pieces, because you have him, like we're seeing him deal with his past, we're seeing him deal with his family, but you're also seeing him in the modern era, him trying to rekindle that relationship with his sister, but also him trying to be the master of an apprentice in Asajj Ventress, who is a character, again, we get a lot of in Clone Wars. but you don't see at all in the movies. So it's a character that's not really big mainstream, but it's a very interesting character where she does sit a little bit more on that pure evil standpoint. And that's kind of a conflict that even as Dooku's becoming a Sith, that like obviously he becomes the Sith master. Like when he becomes a Sith, he meets Asajj Ventress. But even as he's the master, they have that little conflict of Asajj being a lot more along the dark side than Dooku is. And yeah, I think it's just a masterfully crafted, like not retrospective, but like I guess prequel to a character that I liked in the movies, but is now one of my favorite characters in Star Wars.
Sure.
And honestly, one of my favorite characters of all time. So yeah, that's my number 5. Sorry, I'm opening back up my list. My number 4 is a series that I feel like I've brought the name up to you before, but you probably know absolutely nothing about it. It is a series called Shatter.
Yeah, you mentioned it before.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Shatter Me is a post-apocalyptic world. It is supposed to be at its core a romance story, and it is. But that isn't the only focus. And I am a romance reader. I do enjoy romance quite a bit. But this has it is. So think of something like Divergent or Hunger Games, those like post-apocalyptic worlds. They have romance in them, but it's not like as big of a focus. With Shatter Me, it is much bigger of a focus, but I still feel like it has a balance, a very healthy balance. Now the series is 6 main books long, but then they also have novellas, which are about 150-ish page, like basically like, so each book is told from the main character's perspective, but each novella is told from a side character's perspective. So it'll replay the actions that happen, but from a different character's perspective. So, like, for instance, there's a big scene where they're having this giant, like, meeting and everyone gets, like, brutally slaughtered, or supposedly gets brutally slaughtered. And you're seeing that through the main character's eyes. And then the novella that happens right after this book is told from a different character's perspective of the same sequence of events. And you get a lot more like bits and pieces. So in all, I believe it's 11 books. They've actually announced that there's going to be another spin-off book in the same universe following different characters. But I read this entire series in about like 2 weeks. I read all 11 books in like 2 weeks. I read this this is probably the fastest I've ever read like books, like at least a book series that is this long. Again, I love romance, but I feel like one of the things that I love about this series is, so it starts off with the main character being in a mental asylum, and it is all of this story is supposed to be told from a journal perspective, like it is supposed to be a recount in a journal. And one way that you can kind of tell that is because the way that the first book specifically is written, and it kind of evolves over time, is they're locked in a mental asylum and they're going crazy. They've been in here for so long, and you can tell through the writing style and the sense of not just like the words that they're using, but the way that it's written in the sense of skipped words and crossed out. Like words are literally crossed out in the book. Like that's something that you never see in modern books. Like, but again, it's a journal. It's not a like book, like it's told in the perspective of kind of a journal. And what like it progresses over time as the main character gains like, I guess, their own sense of self and sanity back. But it is again, I love love. Terry loves love.
Terry loves love.
And it is a story of enemies to lovers, but you kind of find out that the like enemy isn't as bad as they're portrayed to be. Because I do have a problem with some enemies to lovers stories where you'll have this person who's a sadistic, brutal murderer. who's just evil for the sense of evil, and then someone falls in love with them, and it works out, whatever. I'm a little bit more questionable than that. With this one, it's made out to be, but it ends up where there's a lot more complexity to the characters. In the sense of, oh, you did these actions, you didn't actually do these actions, and that was a lie. Or you did do these actions, but this was the actual reason. Now, granted, once the two fall in love, his main goal is just to protect the person he loves. And there's a love triangle. Not the biggest fan of love triangles, but I think it's done very interestingly. In the way of one of the people. So one of the characters, the other person in a love triangle, he is made out to be kind of the good guy. He's like, oh, I love my brother, like whatever. And then he kind of turns out to be a lot more of a villain than the person who's actually like a villain. And that's what pushes him out of the love triangle. And it's just, I read it so fast because it was so like, it just kept me engaged so much like, I don't know what these characters are going to do next.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, moving on to my next one. And I will say my next two are going to be no surprise to anyone. They're kind of normie. My number one, Carson, you've definitely heard me talk about the book before. But it's literally, ironically enough, I didn't realize this. My number 5 is a single book, and my number 1 is a single book. The other 3 are series. But anyways, my number 3 is Harry Potter.
Oh, I'm surprised that's not higher, in all honesty.
Well, so once you hear my number 2 you'll understand why my number 2 is above. My number 1 might shock you with how high it is on my list, but I'll get into why. But Harry Potter is I don't need to get into what Harry Potter is. If you don't know what Harry Potter is, what are you doing? It is one of the most well-known properties of all time. So I'm not gonna waste a bunch of time getting into why or what Harry Potter is.
Why is Harry Potter?
Yeah, who is Harry Potter? Why is Harry Potter? How is Harry Potter?
Right here, right now, on the Nimrods podcast.
But yeah, I don't reread books. I very rarely rewatch TV shows. Arrow is an example of a series that I've rewatched. But I really don't rewatch. There's so many new things to consume that I don't typically reread or rewatch things all that often. With, again, the things on my top 5 list, though, a lot of them I have. And Harry Potter is one I've read through the entire series, if I'm not mistaken, 5 times. Start to finish, all 7 books. And it's just such a fun story. Ultimately, I think the reason I love it is just because it's fun. It doesn't necessarily have the most complex characters or the most beautiful, unique storytelling of all time. But I think I just really enjoy you're getting to see people's lives from all the way from obviously you have the main characters, Harry, Hermione, and Ron, that we follow. But it's really it's the book series is called Harry Potter. It's really ultimately an ensemble story of Ron, Hermione, Harry, but also additional characters you have characters like Luna Lovegood and the Weasley twins, and you get bits and pieces of all of their stories. And I think that every character is just done really good justice, in the sense of they're given as much time as I feel like they need. Now, granted, you could make the argument of wanting to hear more about these characters, and more about their stories and not just the little bit that we get. But I still feel like for the story and the context, it makes sense of, we're going to get a little the Weasley's trick store. I can't remember the name of it, but it's Weasley something. We get obviously some bits about that and where they are, the Weasley twins at that point in time. Fred and George. But you don't really need to go too in depth. We're not going to get into the building of it and the idea. You're just going to find out that it happens, but that's all you need for their characters. But you still get that. you still get those interactions between Ron and his brothers and things like that. I will say Luna Lovegood, I do wish we got more of. I love Luna Lovegood. She is the autistic person that I see in that movie that I can relate with. It is like I just love the way her brain works. But I think one of the best written characters really is Draco Malfoy. I think if I wanted to get a kind of like with Dooku Jedi Lost, I should say, like, I don't really know if we need one though, because I feel like Draco is, again, if you want to talk about the big three in this, like the Harry, Hermione, Ron, if you wanted to add another person in there, it really is Draco Malfoy. And here's the thing, he's made out to be kind of the villain. Like in the start, he starts as the bully, your standard high school, middle school bully, who's kind of just being a dick to be a dick. And his character progression from that point in time to finding out that his parents are Death Eaters and serve Voldemort. And it's kind of hinted at earlier. Like you get a lot of that, but finding out like he is being forced to kind of be this way. Like this is all he knows is being a dick to people.
It's making his parents proud. That's all.
Exactly. And then you get to that titular scene in the final. I think it was the final book of you have the face-off between Hogwarts and Voldemort's army. And Draco has to make a very important decision at that point in time, in the sense of which side do I stand on? And obviously you have one side where it's his family. His parents are there with Voldemort, like right by his side. And then you have Harry and the friends that he's learned to not necessarily make best friends with, but become more friendly with and kind of learn, be more human with. And it's just so masterfully done, in my opinion. Again, and I should have said this at the beginning. Think what you will about J.K. Rowling. I personally believe, and we talked about this a little bit, I believe, in the first of our top fives. I have a belief in don't hate me or agree or disagree, whatever. I think that people should have the ability to disconnect a work from a creator. I think if you don't, then you'll never be able to enjoy anything again. Let's bring up a weird example of Eminem. Eminem he used to be a hardcore drug addict. Like he's not always done the best things. I mean, a lot of his songs tell those stories, but Eminem's not necessarily a saint. Like he's become a much better person, but in his past, especially when he was making most of his hits, he wasn't a saint. But I don't necessarily have to listen to his music and say, oh, I support that he does drugs and that he hates, like, that he beats women or whatever. I just like his music, and that's like my opinions. Like, agree or disagree with J.K. Rowling's beliefs and whatever the hell she spouts out. I still can enjoy the Harry Potter story without that. At least that's, for me, it's an easier disconnect. Now I feel like there is a little bit of a line there where sometimes there are things that a creator will do that is a little bit more unfree. Like let's say Hitler wrote a book series, like that might be a little bit different. But I feel like as long as that belief system doesn't like throw itself in your face in the story, like you can, I personally have a little bit easier of a time separating whatever their opinions might be.
Sure.
But anyway, going back, I'll like another one of my favorite characters. I won't talk about Harry Potter too much longer because I do have two other. But Hagrid is amazing. The character arc that Hagrid has is so interesting because Hagrid cares about magical beasts so much that it ends up getting him in jail. He gets jailed for his love. Basically, obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. I'm kind of cliff noting it here, but he gets jailed because of circumstances related to how much he loves mythical beasts. And he's just such a kind-hearted character. In the sense of like he is the first person that Harry Potter meets from the wizarding world. He is the one who tells you are a wizard, Harry. Like he is there with Harry literally from day one. And he's just such a lovable oaf. Like, that's obviously the point of his character, is he's a half giant or a partial giant, because he's a breed between giant and human. And he's just such a happy-go-lucky character. Like, obviously he has complexities, and he has him being jailed and things like that, but like, I don't know, he's just that, not comic relief, but like that lovable goofball.
I get what you're saying. I agree with you on that. I get what you're saying, though.
Yeah. So moving on to my number 2. I don't know why I'm looking at my list, because I know what my top 2 are, so I'm just going to put it over here. My number 2 is Percy Jackson.
Okay. Yeah.
My number 2 is Percy Jackson. I also, again, will not get into a story synopsis. Excuse me. So sorry. Like a story synopsis, because I believe at this point, when you have 2 god-awful movies and a currently on-running TV series, if you haven't heard about the story of Percy Jackson, what are you doing? Yeah, dude. Okay, the first movie isn't awful. The first movie is not that bad. It's whatever. It's kind of
fine.
A whatever movie.
It is fine.
Yeah, it is the definition of fun. The second movie is an affront to God. The second movie, The Sea of Monsters, is literally an affront to God. It is absolutely atrocious. Anyone who says otherwise is have your opinions, but you're wrong. It is an affront to God. It is a terrible movie. But with the book series, I feel like one of the reasons I read these when I was a kid. This was one of the big, like, first times that I read young adult. I admittedly, I can't remember if I read Harry Potter or Percy Jackson first. I think it was Percy Jackson though. But anyway, I'm gonna keep this relatively short, because I feel like I can sum up the reason why I love Percy Jackson in only a few points. Obviously, there's a lot with the characters of Percy, because similar to Harry Potter, you kind of have 3 main characters. You have Grover, Percy, and Annabeth. Those are kind of your 3 main characters, and then you have your supporting characters. It's not like one ripped off the other. That's just kind of a standard, like, of young adult novels, especially of the time.
Right. Yeah.
But you have your 3 main characters. I think they're really interesting. You get to see their character growth, with coming to terms of who their parents are, with Annabeth, and Grover trying to live up to his ancestral, like, I guess, burden that was placed on him, and Percy trying to, like, navigate the fact that I've just found out that I'm the son of one of the 3 main Greek gods. And I could talk about all of that, but I think one of the reasons, and it's such a silly reason. So obviously Avengers Endgame is something that is touted as being a huge crossover between so many different movies and so complex. I think Percy Jackson is underrated in the fact that it kind of did that built out connected world first. When I say Percy Jackson, I am saying Percy Jackson because I think Percy Jackson is the best of them. But it's the Rick Riordan universe, because he covers all of the, like, I guess, god pantheos, because he has a story about the Roman gods, following characters in the Roman gods. He has the Egyptian. He has a 3-book series about the Egyptian gods. He has one about the Norse gods. And there is subtle crossovers between them. Like, I'll bring up an example. At the end of the last book in the Egyptian series, it takes place not that far away from New York, Long Island, where the Percy Jackson series has. And kind of one of the final scenes is them looking over and being like, oh, like, what's going on in New York? And kind of hinting at that they're referring to that fact that it's connected to the Percy Jackson, like, directly. But, like, it is confirmed a little bit later on, like, yes, it is all connected. Like, there's a lot more going on here. But Percy Jackson was the first series that came out, but then you build out this pantheos of different, like, gods that all exist in the same universe, kind of like with Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint in a way. And it really delves into the actual, like, mythos in terms of the gods and what the actual Greeks believe. Now, it takes some liberties with that, but it really got me into Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology, and it just got me into mythology in general, which is a topic that I would not have discovered if it wasn't for Percy Jackson, but now I love. I will say Poseidon is my favorite of all of the gods, just because I love the ocean. I almost wanted to become a marine biologist at one point. Not necessarily because of Poseidon, but like kind of goes hand in hand.
Sure.
But I think if you remove all of the like what makes Percy Jackson great and why I enjoy it, it really is because of how many different stories Rick Riordan. Again, I guess realistically, I say Percy Jackson. I really should say the Rick Riordan universe, just because I think all of them are phenomenal. In the sense of I think the Egyptian is my second favorite. It's only 3 books, but it tells a very interesting story of siblings, as opposed to just friends. And yeah, I think that connectedness and that like world that he builds out is done. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he did with building out a pantheon of a universe that all take place in one world, but that was done. Granted, Marvel did it first in the comic books, but like he isn't the inventor of it. But I think he still doesn't get enough credit for how masterfully he built out the fact that all these pantheons exist in one world and that crossover between them. But yeah, jumping to my number 2, or sorry, no, that was my number 2. Jumping to my number 1, it is a single book, as I said, and it is the single most different book. So obviously I've talked about giant overarching series. I've talked about romance. This is a nonfiction book. This book is a retelling of real events. And this book is called Unbroken. This book is I can see the wheels turning because I know I've talked with you very briefly about this book in the past.
It took me a second. I got there. It took me a second, but I got there.
But Unbroken takes place during World War II. And it follows the story of Louis Zamperini, who is a real world, like all of this is real events. Like it's not even hammed up for the story. Like all of this actually happens, at least to my understanding, all of this 100% actually happened. And it tells the story of, like I said, Louis Zamperini, who is a troubled kid. He starts smoking and drinking at a super young age. He gets in a lot of trouble. His brother gives him kind of that ultimatum of you can either fall down this path and die and become like a piece of shit, or his brother is kind of that pinnacle, like goody two shoes, good at school type of thing. Yeah. And his brother kind of gives him that chance of, you're a really fast runner. I will introduce you to like track and field. I will give you this app in because I have a connection with the principal who can get you in. And you can throw yourself in this, or you can continue down your path of smoking, drinking, becoming a I guess, bad person in a way. And he kind of realizes, Louis kind of realizes, like, I don't really have choice in this. Like, I don't really want to continue down this path, so I'm going to try running. He is kind of forced into it a little bit, because he doesn't exactly want to, but he eventually does. Turns out he is a phenomenal runner. He actually goes to compete in the Olympics. And now, granted, this is the Olympics right before World War II breaks out. Like, right. I guess I should say, as World War II is breaking out. Hitler is at the Olympics. Louis actually meets Hitler at the Olympics. Again, all of this is real. All of this actually happened. And so it's telling, like, literally his entire life. And he had the Olympics, and then things take a turn. World War II breaks out. He ends up going into fight in World War II. He goes into the Air Force where he becomes a pilot. And he's pretty good at it. Like, he's pretty damn good at it. But one day on a mission, they get shot down. And a lot of the people on the plane, a lot of his fellow brothers on that plane die. And that's really, like, obviously a really hard thing to go through. But it doesn't end there, because then this kind of kicks off, I guess, the second half of the story, where it is, at the time, he became the longest. It was him and one other person who ends up living, but there were, I think there were in total, if I remember correctly, we were 4 people who survived. the plane crash out of, I think, like the 11 that were on the plane. Again, like I know the story, but I don't remember every single little detail. But they essentially, there were people who survived who that died while they're on the raft because they were on that raft for 47 days in the middle of the ocean. Now, we're not talking modern rafts. We're not talking if a cruise ship sinks nowadays and has a motor on it. No, we're talking about a little dinghy, like a little inflatable. You think of your stereotypical inflatable thing, no cover on them, no nothing, no food, like barely enough food, like absolutely screwed. And so they were lost at sea for 47 days, which at the time was the longest that anyone has ever been lost at sea. Now I think it's been passed. I don't know what that number is, but at the time, I mean, either way, 47 days, that's a month and a half almost. It is insane. I mean, it is a month and a half. Yeah. That is an insane amount of time to be lost at sea. They're literally having to catch birds to eat food. Again, they're watching people who survive the plane crash die because there's not enough food and water. They're collecting rainwater to survive. It is a brutal world. They're getting sunburned. Yeah. And then one day at the end of this 47 days, the boat comes up. Well, also I'm not gonna one-for-one retell the entire story, but while they're at sea, they get shot at, which pops part of their raft. It's like a whole big thing, and that's kind of like that like middle part of the story. Well, not middle. It's still, I think, towards the beginning. You then kick off to, they find a boat comes up. Turns out it's the Japanese who is the enemy, and they get captured and they become prisoners of war. And Lewis, being an Olympic athlete, is like kind of well known in a way. Yeah. So again, I'm going to jump around a lot more from this standpoint because I'm not trying to give a one-for-one like retelling of the entire story.
Sure.
But essentially, Lewis gets absolutely abused and brutalized. I mean, being a prisoner of war back in World War II is an absolutely terrible thing. Honestly, more people probably died in prisoner of war camps than died actually being shot at. Like, it was a miserable, terrible time. He was there for, I believe, 3 years. Now, he was transferred to different prisoner of war camps. Some treated him better than others. But ultimately, he gets out. He actually lived. He died in, I believe, 2009. So like he lived into like his later years. Like he survives all this and then lives. He actually ran the Olympic torch in, I believe it was the 2005 Olympics or something like that. No, yeah, we didn't have Olympics in 2005. But like anyway, like this is all a real story. And I guess talking about why I love it, like stopping the recap, talking why I love it. It is a story of perseverance. And when I read this years ago. I've read it twice now, all the way through. And it really changed a lot of my perspective on life at a young age of like, I don't want to say I've had the easiest childhood, but I have gone through nowhere near as bad the stuff that he has. And reading a story where, again, you can read fictional characters all you want, and I still feel like there's an importance of projecting yourself on fictional characters, but then sitting down and reading a actual story of a real human being who has gone through so much shit that Louis Zamperini has, in the sense of, again, he troubled childhood, becomes an Olympic athlete, thinks that he's going to be all this. World War II breaks out. His dreams are shattered. He goes into war. He gets lost at sea. He becomes a prisoner of war. He gets absolutely abused and almost dies so many times as a prisoner of war. All to come out of it ahead. Right. It really, like, I encourage anyone to read it because it makes you appreciate what you have. I know we can get a lot of doom and gloom all the time, especially nowadays, and what's going on in the world. And everyone feels like, oh, this is the worst time, like whatever. But I encourage you to read this story because you'll become really grateful for how good you actually have it. Because you're telling Lewis a story, but it's also the story of how bad World War II was. Like, a lot of, like, I was not alive during World War II. There's very few people nowadays that were alive during World War II.
Sure, yeah.
Or at least fought in World War II.
Yeah.
And it is telling that story of how absolutely brutal World War II was. I mean, again, you're coming off of World War I, going into not that long after another brutal war. Yeah. And it really makes you appreciate what you have. And also it is a story of perseverance and how you can kind of, I guess, force yourself to believe in yourself. And like you can easily give up at any time. Like you can okay, cool. I have a math test. I'm not good at math. I think I'm gonna fail. I could give up and not care. Or I could push through and believe, hey, I might not like succeed at this, but I can push through. And again, Lewis doesn't know if he's going to make it every single day. He thinks he's going to die pretty much every single day. He doesn't know if he's going to be able to wake up. And he just keeps pushing and keeps going. And again, I've said this every single time, and this will be the last time I say it. It changed my perspective on how much a person can endure. Because again, I've been through a lot of things. I've had a lot of health complications in my life that I easily could have let absolutely destroy me and put me down. And having to come to terms with, again, the possibility of your own death, especially for me at kind of a young age. It's a very difficult thing to go through, but this book gives you a perspective of you can push through anything. The human body and the human mind are absolutely fascinating things that can endure way more than you feel like you think it can. Like you can be pushed way farther beyond and still be able to recover from that if you allow yourself to. Right. You can allow something to crumble you. Lewis could have given up and died in those prisons. He could have died when his plane crashed. He could have died when he was lost at sea. But no, even though he didn't know if he would wake up again, he wanted to live again. And that was such an inspiring story to read of just, again, human perseverance that it is my number one book. It is outside of any other book that I've ever written or probably any book I'll read again. It is so unique in my taste. Again, we're talking about Percy Jackson and Harry Potter, and then you're talking about this story of a real life person who fought in World War II. But I feel like that the fact that it is my number one should go to show just how impactful this story was to my perspective on life.
Because of how different it was to everything else. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, that wraps up my top 5. I know you just wrapped up your top 5. So we'll go ahead, unless you have any final notes on any of the top 5s, kick it off into our last and final segment before ending of is there anything you're excited for? I'll go ahead and start this one off. I know I typically kick it off to you. So previously we recorded these on Fridays. I think we're going to be swapping those to Friday mornings. So to give you a little hint, it is currently 1 p.m. on Saturday, and literally the second we end this podcast, I'm going to watch the final episode of Solo Leveling, at least of this season. So there are many things that I'm excited for. I literally, the second I get off of this, I'm going to watch the last episode of the current season of Solo Leveling. So that is what I'm the most excited for. I am super hyped to see where this goes.
For me, Daredevil, Last of Us, I'm excited to rewatch those, get back into them, or for Daredevil, continue on the road of Born Again. I'm excited to start Andor again, because I know I started it and then I never really finished it, but I loved the world that they did start to set up, and I thought it had such a unique tone that Star Wars never really had. So I'm excited to get back into that world and watch that. I think that's going to be really, really good. I'm excited for next week's episode of the podcast. I think that's going to be an exciting one. I think it's going to be great. Yeah. But no, I mean, other than that, I'm just excited for this week. Excited to see, where it goes, where it leads. See what happens.
Yeah. I think there's one other thing, and I'll talk about it very briefly. The Avengers Doomsday cast reveal. I told you I wanted to stay away from it. I did end up getting all of it spoiled for me, unfortunately. People just can't stop posting it everywhere. So I have seen all the names. Very interested at some of the, I guess, I will say I don't think this is the entire cast, but I will say they're very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting who they left out. Like, for instance, Tom Holland, not on there. Very interesting.
He won't be.
Like, I guess I'm very curious to see why they left certain characters out. I'm bringing this up now because I'm very excited to see where this movie goes, but I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts and problems with it. We'll save this conversation for a later episode because I think this should be an entire episode. Probably maybe the week before Doomsday even comes out, which is a year from now. But yeah. I bring it up just now because that was a big thing that happened this week in terms of the cast reveal for Doomsday.
I watched all 5 hours of that stuff too. That's insane.
I did not because I was literally in the office at work, and you were texting me, and I was like, I pulled up Instagram and I saw that it was just a live stream, and I was like, I'm not. It's like no.
I ain't doing this. No, heck no.
Yeah. But yeah. With that being said, do you have anything else to say before we wrap this up, Carson?
I'm good, brother. End this thing. End this sucker. Land this plane.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of their Nerdy Nimrods podcast, where your favorite Nimrods talk all things nerdy. You can find us on all podcast hosting platforms, whether that be Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, YouTube, even other ones that I can't even list because I didn't know they existed until we put them on them. You can find us on social media at Nerdy Nimrods on Blue Sky, X, Instagram, Twitter. Again, every single platform except for Facebook, because I'm still having problems with our Facebook account. Not that we really post on our Facebook account, but just want to throw that out there. But yeah, with all that being said, I had a lot of fun talking with you again, brother. I enjoyed this. This is a light of my week, and I hope to continue doing it. Yeah. Again, we've been doing this for a month now. We'll be doing this hopefully for another month, if not more. But with that being said, thanks for watching. Stay nerdy.